And we are live. This is Dark Journalist. What a fantastic crowd we have out there in the Ideas Room already. Of course, I am joined by the lovely Olivia.
Hi, everybody.
And Olivia, we are going into a case from 11 years ago.
Yes.
Which is probably one of the most important cases and was completely left off the wayside. Quite fascinating. However, there was tons of coverage for that one shining day when it actually happened. And it was October 13th, 2010 is the case I'm referring to. It's going to be a big jump into the UFO file tonight for X Series 111. This is the 2022 UFO warning, the missing contact case. And it features heavily a group called the Transcenders, who are trans channels, and Stan Fulham, who was an ex-NORAD officer, and the whole entire population of New York City on October 13th, 2010, and a number of them who witnessed this amazing event of these ships hovering over the city. So much more powerful than something like the Tic Tac video, for example. And yet they try to suppress it, and that they did. And we're going to show how they did that. But then we're also going to show who made this prediction about these ships being over New York City and what was going to happen there. I want to say that, what do you got?
LOL, trans people. I hadn't thought of that.
We definitely are looking at a case where, you know, it's been largely ignored. But what's strange is that it was so ignored inside UFO circles. And I did bring it to the attention of the top level researchers, and
no interest.
They fell down on the job on that one. I also think there might be kind of a thing that's hanging, like a cloud that hangs over this case, which makes it almost impenetrable on purpose. But nonetheless, it's one of the best on record. First of all, when do you find a prediction that actually comes true, especially in alternative or UFO circles, where they're like, aha, UFOs are going to appear over the Brooklyn Bridge at 10 o'clock. We do hear predictions a lot, but none of them ever come to pass. Well, this one actually came true. And there's a big kind of personal anecdote that I can share in relation to this story, which is that I actually was contacted at the time I was working at a lifestyle magazine, and I was contacted with this press release in September of 2010 saying this thing is going to happen, and it's going to happen exactly on October 13th. In fact, the NORAD, ex-NORAD officer who was making the rounds at that time trying to get this out there was in fact Stan Fulham. And he had predicted down to the day when this was going to happen. So I found that really quite fascinating. But I put it aside because I said, well, I'll keep an eye out on the day, and sort of left it. And it was also interesting in that the magazine I was working for didn't deal at all. It was a technology magazine, so it didn't deal with UFOs or anything like that. So how strange it was that it made it to me. So the author of this book, Challenges of Change, is the name of the book, and Stan Fulham was the author. This is his third edition of the book that he put out in 2010, and it contained all of these very interesting overviews on alien groups, which you don't find, I have to say, when you're looking into this, such a comprehensive, just a real overview of these different groups and a council, a galactic council. So some of these things sounded really far out, and yet the Transcenders had been doing, and Rick Thurston had been doing this channeling of this group, the Transcenders, for a couple of decades, and some really kind of powerful people in that world, the Shirley MacLaine types, had lauded his abilities. But I actually knew that certain political figures in Canada and the UK had gone to him. So he had a very interesting reputation hanging out there, and his trans-channel activity was very much as Edgar Casey would give. Now, we know that we're in the middle of all these things that are going on in the public with the crazy mandates and Stepford Biden and all these bizarre political situations that are happening. And right in the heart of it, they are raising this UFO threat idea. And that also plays very heavily into the things that we're seeing. So I think it's important for us to get a grasp on that. And tonight we will. I want to remind everyone that we're going to be taking questions in the second part of the program. So you can have them ready for Miss Olivia. And she'll actually be taking your questions now for later. How's the temperature out there?
Very good. Very excited. I think we all need a relief from, talking about current events, and like UFO stuff is great. And personally, I've always been fascinated with this story, and I want to know more about these different alien groups.
No question about it. Well, I've said that the Atlantis story is best told by Edgar Cayce. It's such a comprehensive overview. Theosophy got into it. Rudolf Steiner got into it. Others touched on it, even extensively. But it's Cayce's version of Atlantis that gives you the whole overview of the technology rise, the crash, the 3 destructions, the 3 islands. And it's such a rich tapestry to work with. And I have to say, in relation to Stan Fulham's work with the Transcenders, that it brings out the different alien groups in such a way, touching on some of the very well-known ones. For example, the Greys as a scientific race who don't have any emotion and who are just kind of, science is their belief system. And what's interesting, too, is that the Greys supposedly had cloned themselves out of the ability to reproduce. And they were coming back here to use that human DNA to repopulate their race. I found that very interesting. What ended up happening, I'm going to tell this story real briefly about all this, which is that after I got that press release, I paid attention, I put it aside, and then October 13th, 2010 came around, and there were all these UFOs over New York City, and Stan Fulham, the ex-NORAD officer, had in fact predicted it correctly. Let's take a look at some of those reports. New York City UFO sighting raises questions. This is how it got out there. And you get some idea when we're looking at that very kind of globulous UFO that's hanging out there in the picture. And it's giving us an indication that something strange is going on already. Now, interestingly enough, on October 13th, 2010, a CBS News crew had been out there in the morning for the opening of a new Apple store. And so they were sitting there, and their camera was aimed at the skies. And it caught all kinds of great stuff. And then you can see the genuine reactions of people walking around and saying, what is this thing hanging over us? Now, this is in the Chelsea kind of West Village end of New York City. And it was early. This was very early. And of course, in New York City, it was only about 9 years after September 11th. So anything going on in the sky was automatically, people were very sort of tense. All right, let's read this. New Yorkers were buzzing about mysterious shiny objects flying over Manhattan yesterday. Was it a UFO? Inside Edition has the story. It was the day New York stood still. Thousands of New Yorkers pointed to the sky at a mysterious object hovering overhead. The bright objects seemed to divide into several smaller objects and then slowly move together again. Adding to the mystery, a former Air Force officer predicted it 4 months ago. Stanley Fulham is the author of a book on UFO visitations, and don't worry, he says they come in peace. George Stephanopoulos could hardly believe it on Good Morning America. Good old Clintonista George. Quote, this is Stephanopoulos, that retired Air Force officer who predicted aliens would come all across the world said they would come, not stop or talk to anybody. They just want to signal that they're around, joked Stephanopoulos. This is some 7 years before all the tic-tac nonsense. The New York Post said the UFO was was over the upscale Chelsea neighborhood. And the Daily News asked, what the heck was that? Not even the Federal Aviation Administration can explain the phenomena. A spokesman says the object is not a weather balloon, calling it nothing we can account for. Later, they would come up with this bogus story that, it was some floating balloons. But it wasn't, because it was seen all day, and there's a number of other things that came about as a result. More about this incredible sighting that took place October 13th, 2010 over New York City, and it was predicted some 4 months earlier by an ex-NORAD officer. Some more stories in this period. Mystery shiny objects floating over Manhattan spark UFO frenzy. And this one, New York Daily News, a mysterious shiny object, actually it was multiple, floating high over Manhattan's west side set off a flurry of reports and wild speculation Wednesday that a UFO was flying over the city. People saw the FAA said they began to get flooded with calls starting at 1:30 p.m. from people reporting a silvery object hovering high over Chelsea. Law enforcement sources said they believed the object was likely some sort of balloon, but as of late Wednesday, they had not confirmed exactly what it is. A Daily News reporter could see a tiny silver dot floating approximately 5,000 feet above 23rd Street and 8th Avenue, where dozens of people gathered late in the afternoon to catch a glimpse. It's been hovering there for a while. I'm just kind of baffled, said Joseph Torres of Dyker Heights, Brooklyn, who spotted the object after leaving a movie. How can it be ordinary? There's something going on. Indeed, there was something going on. The Federal Aviation Administration said it received calls to its operations center, but after reviewing radar data, the agency could not find anything out of the ordinary. Quote, we reran radar to see if there was anything there that we can't account for, but there is nothing in the area. Okay, so they were punting at that point. Later, they were going to say, oh, it was nothing. Now, there were a number of unusual things that were happening at that time. For example, all the air traffic control around Manhattan got shut down. A definite sign that, although they didn't want to talk about it, they were very clear that something was going on. And that's also a weird one because later they would give the excuse that it was the smell of gas at a Long Island airport that was causing this shutdown, which didn't make any sense at all. But I'm going to show you those reports. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist X series episode 111. We're going deep into the 2022 UFO warning, and this is the missing contact case. I want to remind you, with all the incredible censorship that we're riding in the middle of here, to go to darkjournalist.com and make sure you're signed up for our newsletter, which is just going to keep us in touch. Of course, that's a free newsletter, and we do our best to let you know in advance all the great interviews and X series episodes that we have coming up for you. And that's at darkjournalist.com. Of course, that's the best way for us to stay in touch. And we've listed also our Twitter and Facebook. And now we've started on Telegram. And that link is also in the description of this video. That's at Real Dark Journalist. And so far, so good on Telegram. Some of those, it's hard. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, YouTube, Twitter, there's a lot of easy access there, but they've been doing incredible censorship. So obviously, we're going to start appearing on other platforms, but as long as we have the platform here and we're here to be with you tonight, so much the better, I would say. So while I go for this, Miss Olivia, what do you got?
John Dandy wants to know, do you know when Ilana Freeland's new book will be available?
When I spoke to her, it was 2 weeks ago, and she was doing kind of a final edit job, but they were supposed to print it and then have it available sometime around now. Now, I know if you go to ilanafreeland.com, there's a link there that will allow you to pre-order the book, but it's certainly coming soon, and it's synthetic biology. It's going to be huge because her research is so nonstop. And Ilana's just very ahead of the curve on this, and she has been for a long time. Look, when I was speaking to her in 2015 about the space fence, she already had figured out so much about the global control grid that they're trying to activate now. So I put her in that category, like Catherine Austin Fitts, so far ahead of the game. If you read Joseph Farrell's book from 2016 on the breakaway civilizations and secret space program, that's all the stuff that we're seeing now. It's 5 years ago. It's all written in there. So a lot of these, really kind of advanced people we have around, they've been telling the story. They've been giving us the heads up of what's happening long before it happened. And for me, when I look at that, I've always been amazed because there's actually a space report that Fitz put out about the space economy in 2015. And that's all the stuff that we're seeing now about asteroid mining and all that. So she's given those high-level Solari briefings, but she's always been amazing like that.
Hold everything.
Oh, what do you got?
Preston Roberts says, I was in Alexandria, Virginia in 1957, age 7. I saw Val Thor arrive. If you have any information, please reach out to us.
Well, Val is a very interesting story, and no one's ever really debunked it, but it gets into this theme of these aliens coming to visit our authorities saying, don't blow yourselves to pieces, and giving us those warnings that we were real close to doing that in the 50s, which is why there's so many stories. And one of the figures that I think we can go into tonight is Orthon. He's one of those figures. And I think...
I love this stuff.
George Adamski, who brought forward that, is... he's very interesting because he's one of the leading theosophists in the 1940s in California, and then he gets involved with the UFO thing. And we know that with the mystery school work, what we're looking at is some really hardcore letting out, moving the culture in different directions by giving them these advanced secrets. But then something happens where there's kind of a merger of theosophy and some of these themes with almost like a Space Brother type narrative. And it's hard for me to say exactly what was driving this. But I will tell you that the mystery schools are very aware of interstellar visitors and of the intentions of the majority of the groups that were visiting. And Tesla's in tonight's story, as well as the JFK record. So we've got, it's got a little bit of everything for the X crowd. It's great to have so many of you here with us. Since I mentioned Orthon, this gets into the Pleiadians. And this is kind of interesting because the Pleiadians, and I often recommend Gigi Young's work on the Pleiadians, as she really gets a snapshot of who they are. But the Pleiadians play a very large role with this Stan Fulham story because the Transcenders are saying those craft that are hovering over New York City, which I'm going to return to here briefly, they are, in fact, Pleiadian ships giving us the heads up that, this is some kind of contact and gauging our reaction. The thrust of their contact is that things like nuclear testing have really rendered parts of our environmental protection there in the stratosphere in very serious condition. And what they're trying to do is repair it. But in order to repair it, they're going to become visible, and it's going to cause a great flurry of people being like, why are we seeing all these ships? So it was like an early shot across the bow saying, we're going to be there helping you. And the governments have had mixed reactions according to these Transcenders. So we're going to get into that as well. All right, George Adamski, the kind of classic 50s contactee. There he is with his Pleiadian-like blonde-haired Nordic space brother, Orthon. And Orthon gives him the heads up. Hey, we're here to help you. We're here to make sure mankind does not destroy itself with nuclear weapons. We've been with you for a long time, and we want to use you as a messenger. The way that we'll do it is we'll tell you when certain UFOs are going to appear. And in fact, Adamski over and over again was able to do that, saying UFOs are going to fly over such and such. So there's a tie there with Stan Fulham's story. But again, and this goes beyond any kind of... this is more about identifying characteristics because there are all sorts of different types of aliens and appearances. In the case of the Pleiadians, they appear to be very Nordic, and people very often mistake them for people from that side of the world. There's a couple of quick things about Orthon I want to read, though, and I will say this about Adamski, although there's always been those little kind of stories about Adamski, like, oh, he said he met the Pope, but he didn't. And, we've certainly had a number of UFO charlatans, skulking around out there through Gaia TV and stuff like that. So we've had our own waves of that. In the case of Adamski, however, I have to say he's very original, and one of the leading theosophists of the day actually co-wrote a book with him in the beginning, when he was coming out about the flying saucers. And I think this is really kind of making it very credible. Okay, on November 20th, 1952, Adamski and several friends were in the Colorado desert near the town of Desert Center, California, when they purportedly saw a large submarine-shaped object hovering in the sky. Believing that the ship was looking for him, Adamski is said to have left his friends and headed away from the main road. Shortly afterwards, according to Adamski's account, a scout ship made of a type of translucent metal landed close to him, and a pilot, a Venusian called Orthon. And Venusian was the way that they did the Pleiadian, by the way. That's what they called him at the time. And it's kind of interesting because later we kind of get a little more sophisticated in the 70s and 80s. It's hard to pull things like, in the 50s, the 40s and 50s, we didn't know anything about the planets really. So it was easy to say, hey, there's life on Venus. But after a while, we really started to develop that space program. So the clearer picture started to emerge. During this conversation now that Adamski has with Orthon purportedly warned of the dangers of nuclear war, and Adamski later wrote that the presence of this inhabitant of Venus was like the warm embrace of great love and understanding wisdom. Adamski claimed Orthon had refused to allow himself to be photographed and instead had asked Adamski to provide him with a blank photographic plate, which Adamski claimed he had given Orthon. George Hunt Williamson, who was a big theosophist as well, also claimed that after Orthon left, he was able to take plaster casts of Orthon's shoe imprints. The imprints contained mysterious symbols, which Adamski said was a message. So we've got these kind of Pleiadian Nordic-style beings coming down, giving these messages. Question is, what was going on? Because there was a series of contactees like this, and some of them were really hard to debunk. In fact, it looks, in terms of credibility, I would say a number of the 50s and 60s contactees were far more credible than the contactees that would follow, including, some of the best really came about in that early 60s period, like Betty and Barney Hill, for example. All right, so let's switch back to the New York story for a minute, keeping those Pleiadians in mind. And also their great message was somewhat environmental. You're destroying things with nuclear war. You might destroy a section of the galaxy. New York City UFO sighting. Mystery object provokes rash of interest. Speculation. It's Huntington Post. So definitely the coverage immediately afterwards, the day after, was certainly there and was not lacking. What happened was the case itself gets buried very quickly in like a week. And then over time, Stan Fulham gives some interviews immediately on the heels of his prediction coming true. And after I got the press release, I was also interested in talking to him, but he wasn't going to be available and until the end of October or early November. And then Stan Fulham dies mysteriously after his prediction comes true. As Stan Fulham, we're going to get into his bio and stuff. He was an older man at this point, and but still, I found his death unusual, and then other deaths associated with the case became more and more unusual. But so what happens when Stan dies is the case itself goes off the radar dramatically, and the UFO kind of prophecy that there was going to be a sighting over a major city and that it was related to the idea of these Pleiadians wanting us to be warned about, the destruction that had taken place inside of the stratosphere and the environment from these nuclear tests and other types of corporate pollution, then, this whole thing kind of just started to go underground. And there were a few people talking about it. And eventually, since the main researchers in the UFO field dropped the ball and never ran with it, the story really went away. Although it's remarkable if you think about it. I call it the Roger Maris of the UFO world. We all know that Roger Maris in 1961 became the home run king, but because the press had such a thing, an obsession with Mickey Mantle and didn't want him to be the home run king, and they didn't like him that he didn't play up to them, that Maris basically was blown off, even though he hit 61 home runs, which at the time was a record. All right, so a couple of things about Pleiadians. Actually, I want to do a couple of. Here's a shot of Stan Fulham, who had a very interesting career as a NORAD officer, and previously in the Air Force had been captured in Germany. And this is very interesting about Stan and his bio, because Stan had been put in a prison in Germany, POW camp, and while they were in the camp, they saw a dramatically huge UFO coming from the direction of Russia to Germany. And this was 1943, where they really didn't know exactly what was going on. But the period, of course, at the time when the Allies were flying all these sorties and bombing missions and things, they were seeing these lights that were following them. And one of the things that we hear from people in that period is that they would fly in formation like, the fighters were flying in formation. So they didn't disturb them. They didn't interfere. They were just there. And they were basically like weird orbs. So they became known as the Foo Fighters, of course. Now, in that camp, there were a number of pilots who had also seen these Foo Fighters. So Stan, in 1943, is already experiencing these incredible stories and a sighting of his own before he becomes, kind of famous for a day with this UFO prophecy in 2010. That's quite remarkable if you just think of what was required for that to happen. Of course, in his years at NORAD, he had said the policy was just to deny any case that came up in relation to UFOs, and that's what they did. In fact, we're going to get into why they seem to be opening up on some of this now, and how they're kind of taking what should be happening and using it as a fake out for the Central Intelligence Agency. The Central Intelligence Agency still trying to control and get their paws on the narrative of the UFO story, having problems because they keep sending guys like Lou Elizondo out there. And we're going to get into how the Lou Elizondo TTSA story is kind of the inverse of this remarkable prediction that Stan came forward with in 2010. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. We're here in X Series 111. This is the UFO Warning 2022. And it's the missing contact case, which is Stan Fulham and Pleiadians over New York City, which was my other working title for the episode. We're going to be taking your questions in the second half of the program. I'm going to jump here into some news that's coming out in relation to JFK before we go any further, because, of course, there's so much of the UFO file wrapped up in the JFK story. Before I do that, Miss Olivia, what do you got?
I was just thinking how vital Stan was before he died. And of course, he supposedly got pancreatic cancer, died very quickly.
Right.
But if you watch the videos of him, he's an incredibly vital man. Passionate, strong, sturdy. And I just, always question the timing of his death. It doesn't seem right. Absolutely. And what's interesting is, this is pretty wild, actually. When you think about Stan Fulham, there are some interviews with him by someone named Randy Kitcher, who's the person who helped Stan to publish his books and things. And it's just a remarkable UFO researcher in his own right up there in Canada. I had an opportunity
to interview him because I was working on a documentary about this case, which I still have a lot of material for, but obviously I haven't got the documentary done yet. But he was kind enough to assist with that, and he has some incredible videos of Stan in this period. And I think the videos are maybe from the summer before the prediction, so somewhere in that July period. And they're short, they're like 7 minutes each, but I highly recommend them. Stan, of course, as I mentioned, he did go on coast to coast in relation to his prediction. So there is that on the public record. And there were a couple of other UFO interviews. I think like Alfred Levermont Weber, he was one of them. That's a good one. And Bill Burns from UFO Hunters interviewed him as well for his own podcast at the time. I don't know if that one's still around, but really interesting. Like I said, for the week after that happened, this was absolutely remarkable. And the story was floating out there, and it was, Stan wasn't really such a big part of it. It was the actual piece of what was hovering over the city. Now, there's a couple of weird things about the sighting itself. Like I said, it took place down there in Chelsea. Those are actual shots of people looking up at it, not able to believe what they're seeing, which are these kind of huge metallic shining, spinning balls in the air. And they look interconnected, but sometimes they look like a huge tapestry. Then you see just one. There's some blow up with that symbol of what they are on the video side.
Can I just throw something out there?
Yes.
When we were watching it, they didn't strike me as metallic. You know, I understand the sun could be reflecting off of them, but they seemed more luminous, like the light was coming from inside of them.
Yeah, they also seem to have like a spongy kind of globulous quality where they are sort of morphing into different shapes, all coming back to the circular shape. That's one of the more classic shots of that sighting that took place on October 13th, 2010. Of course, there were all kinds of cell phone videos of people pointing out their window that day saying, what is going on here? They really thought this was it. And then later, the story started to go in this direction. New Yorkers mistake balloons for UFOs. They were back to balloons again, as if the Roswell thing wasn't enough, huh?
There was some story about like some school releasing
balloons? And it was like in Queens, and there was no way. They were like, oh yes, the school teacher released some balloons, haha. But there's some very odd things that were taking place around it. Let me see here. Yes, and they have to do with the shutdown of these flights in airports during the time that the sighting was taking place.
I didn't know that.
And they never connected them in the press, but nonetheless, here they are. Okay, flights resume at area airports after smoke condition. There's CBS New York. That's October 13th, 2010. Here's the article. Flights resumed at 3 local airports Wednesday night following a report of a smoke condition at the Tracon Raider facility on Long Island. For about an hour, all flights from John F. Kennedy, LaGuardia, and Newark Liberty International airports were grounded. FAA spokesman Jim Peters said the New York Terminal Radar Approach Control in Westbury was evacuated as a precaution after the smell of gas was reported Wednesday. A handful of air traffic controllers remained behind. He said other staff members were cleared to return about an hour later. But he said the evacuation led to residual delays at LaGuardia and Kennedy. The FAA's website reported that departures at LaGuardia were experiencing departure delays of up to an hour. So it was a real interruption. At the bottom, there's a quote that says, pilots told us that where all the radars kept that controls all 3 airports, that's not on the site here, that there was some kind of smoke in the building and an evacuation. This is it's a pure cover story for the fact that they didn't want anything flying while this sighting was taking place, because they'd have to fly right through the Tholian web there of these fascinating ships. There is the actual news story, which is hard to find now. And there was all these local New York reports talking about the flights being grounded on October 13th, 2010, when the sighting was taking place. That's really kind of has to make us go, okay. So you're stopping flights from going out, and pretty soon you're going to put out a weather balloon story. Sounds familiar. Yes.
I've got a great question from Cold Aussie.
Yes.
Why is it that they don't scramble intercepts when you see huge flaps like this?
Well, I think that they do. In fact, we've heard all those stories, but they don't publicize that. And if you have it happening over like Phoenix, for example, with the Phoenix Lights story, where these incredible lights just sit over a city, and the governor himself is forced to acknowledge it eventually. And there's so many witnesses to it. That's one where if you send these jets out to follow them, then that's going to cause even more commotion and bring more attention to it. So certainly, if they were legit, they would be sending planes up there. I think.
Or if we didn't know who they were and what was going on.
Yes.
They know.
Exactly. That's another piece, which is they are always observing UFOs. And so they have so much more data that they haven't shared with the public. Let's face it. I mean, we're probably 50 years behind what they know. And they're trying to drip out this grainy footage and, rolling out ex-CIA people to try to wow the UFO crowd. So this is a real big problem. And the way I look at the TTSA piece, the Elizondo New York Times 2017 reveal, the kind of false disclosure piece, is it's the inverse of this story. It's like so many of the pieces of UFO disclosure and revelations were in this October 13th, 2010, but in true kind of advanced alien style, which the Pleiadians are supposed to be known for, it was like, take it or leave it. If you want to make a big deal out of this sighting, you've got the material. If you want to acknowledge this thing is happening, if not, we'll be there and we'll be gone. I think that's how those more advanced groups work. I'm going to get into a few things about the Pleiadians and the legends in relation to it. And what the Transcenders told me about the Pleiadians. Because what happens is Stan Fulham dies, and I'm a guy working at a magazine thinking, I'd like to know more about this story. And I'm also thinking in that period of changing around, not working for lifestyle magazines anymore, but doing dark journalist full time. So it was kind of an opportunity for that. And what I found out was that the prediction, in fact, and the material, if you read the book, it comes from the Transcenders who were interacting and who were channeling for Stan Fulham. Well, Rick Thurston was the person who was doing the channeling, a la Casey style, as I mentioned. And Thurston, during the day, his day job was that he worked with special needs children. And he had this kind of remarkable service-driven aspect to him. And then when he was doing the Transcender thing, he had this remarkable voice, which I'm going to play tonight. And so I ended up being able to get in touch with him, and I recorded something like 12 hours of material with Rick. And over time, I have met people or interacted with them on email who also had sessions with him. And so there's quite a body of work. Of course, I believe it's rickthurston.com. The basic kind of outline of the site is still there. I'm not sure if they still respond to everything, but so I'm not sure how updated it all is. But the thrust of the thing is certainly there. Let's get a little bit on Rick Thurston then, who had made this prediction that ex-NORAD officer Stan Fulham had brought forward to the public, including in press releases. And like I said, when I dealt with Rick and he was doing the Transcenders, you knew something remarkable was going on. I've said this before, when you are around sort of people who are dabbling in psychic stuff, it's always interesting. But you also know when something dramatic is going on, sort of like the energy shifts in the room. People have that kind of power when you're doing psychic stuff, like a Gigi Young. Gigi certainly has that impact. But Rick, I always felt when I had, I'd get through talking an hour with him and would feel very energetically different. So he was very interesting. And he had a great body of work out there relating to Atlantis and psychic experience and UFOs. So he really had that Casey touch, I have to say. And for a while I was thinking, this is remarkable. It's like actually, I had read the Casey work my whole life, and here was somebody who was basically doing what Casey had done, but he was also talking about UFOs, which Casey didn't really have a chance in that era to get into that much. Unless he was talking about the Atlantean UFOs, which he did extensively. This is more Rick channeling and doing those kind of one-on-one sessions. There's a great energy, I think, that came off him. And I also don't think that he promoted himself that much. I think he was very determined to bring the work out. And in those, sort of 10 or 12 odd hours of conversation that I have with him, he brought forward so many interesting facts and things without me giving him those details. So he had a natural psychic ability in that state. There's just no question about it. What's interesting is how sort of detailed his knowledge of the Pleiadians were and how important I feel that is for this period that we're in. If we can kind of get a snapshot of this original UFO prediction, because 2022, in fact, comes up in relation to the Transcenders talking about this period. And they even talk about the COVID part and the mass and the whole shebang. So it's going to get really interesting tonight. You're watching the Dark Journalist X-111 series tonight, and it is the 2022 UFO warning. Stan Fulham, the Transcenders, Rick Thurston. This is the missing contact case. All of ufology dropped the ball, but you know what? The media had done a lot of suppression on it. But it's unfortunate that this case was vouchsafed. Yes, what happened?
AM says the date of the UFO incident, 10/13/2010, is actually a Fibonacci sequence. 112358131. That is crazy.
Interesting. Huh.
Thank you for that.
Well, I've always wondered about the date because, it's one of those, it wasn't exactly like 12/22/2012. It was one of these kind of October 13th things. But there was something powerful. I remember being stunned that the strange press release that had made it to me 3 weeks earlier had been up there. That actually came true. I was like, what's going on here? And of course, whenever you hear NORAD, it's like, because there's all this kind of COG things about NORAD. But I think in the case of Stan, he had such a long, distinguished military career that he really was trying to share this information. He was a very, very spiritual guy, as was Rick. So I think in that case, we're getting information from people who are genuine seekers, and we haven't even touched what they had to say about the future coming up, and we're going to get into that tonight. Okay, a little more of the Pleiadian, mixing in the Pleiadian part. Let's start with Rick Thurston. So Rick, this is what I wanted to round the first part of that out with, which is I'm working with Rick. I'm getting this information about why the Pleiadians showed up over New York City. And I'm asking him all kinds of questions, from everything from the JFK assassination to Atlantis to past lives. It was just the whole gambit, and quite remarkable, I would say, his responses. So at a certain point, I check in now. It's about 6 months since that initial contact, and Rick Thurston has died. And that was very unfortunate timing. Rick was a relatively young man. I believe in fact, that, he was in his late 50s, and I just remember being absolutely stupefied. So on September 17th, 2011, less than a year after all this, Rick Thurston is dead. So the original source of the story, Stan Fulham, dies very shortly, about 6 weeks after the prediction comes true. And then shortly thereafter, 6 months later, Rick Thurston dies. I got to tell you, I felt like this, this is a powerful story, and it is having these huge interruptions from people who are trying to get it out. So it intrigued me quite a bit. Let's read a little bit about Rick here. So this will be accomplished in various forms of meditation, an internationally known non-conscious trance channeler. Rick has been a teacher of the paranormal since childhood. At the age of 11, he became inspired by the book There is a River, based on the life of Edgar Cayce. In fact, his life, he has so many interesting parallels with Cayce. It's quite remarkable. So he discovered an interest in Cayce, and he started different types of self-hypnosis, and then it started happening. He started going into these trance states. And I mentioned that he caught the attention of a number of celebrities and politicians. It's true. I mean, there is a shot of him with Shirley MacLaine, and she had wonderful things to say about him and sought him out for readings. For over 31 years, Rick and his sources guided, directed, and assisted individuals to expand their life's direction. Through accessing the deep trance state, a group of spiritual entities called the Transcendors provide answers to questions. He also achieved the animated state of allowing single entities to provide their expertise in helping others. So he appeared on Canadian radio and TV. He was a regular on some shows, but I don't think he ever really pushed his public profile that much. When I first encountered him, I had really only heard about him through the predictions. In fact, he describes for us what happened the first time he accessed the trance state. Actually, it was the second time, because he didn't believe it when it first happened. He had many different unique experiences while working with the trance states. He explained to us about a time when he could read minds. So he is a natural psychic, and I experienced some of that when I interacted with him. I mean, it was kind of extraordinary in a sense that, as I said, if you've done things like psychic readings, it opens up a side of you when you start to kind of transmit the details. I think, and that's always a good experience, but there are some psychics who really, it's like your third eye is suddenly awakened. A little more about Rick. I think that he originally became aware of the Transcenders speaking through him, and he called them the Watchers originally. And they say here, interestingly, Rick could not listen to the recordings of the material given by his sources because it would give him a headache. I found that very interesting. I asked about this. Wow,
that's fascinating.
Yeah, think about that. I asked about this once, and the Transcenders explained that his subconscious was in conflict because he was not supposed to be there to hear the trance, and this would cause him discomfort. Here he describes what he called the Watchers when he first initiated the trance state and how they became the Transcenders. So this is an important aspect, I think, that he starts to do it, and then people start to kind of open up. There's so many testimonials about him, and I can only say that I was riveted, but I was really drawn in by the fact that he was directly connected with this UFO prediction that took place in October of 2010. Okay, so we're going to take we're going to read some quotes from the Transcenders and Challenges of Change. I actually am going to play a clip of Rick Thurston speaking, just so we can y'all get a handle on the voice here, which I think was quite remarkable. And let's see if we've got that here. Okay.
Free will teaches a concept here of basic realities. It allows you to choose, per se here, from that of a separate point of view. It allows you to exist within a reality here of one's own choosing perceptually. So you can choose how you're going to see life.
Instantly, that voice just kind of comes across, Miss Olivia. You can just feel that lift in the voice.
Yes, I feel it immediately.
And it's an unusual accent. It's neither English. It has a feel of that kind of. It sounds European. It sounds English, but it's not quite. And his own speaking voice didn't sound like that. Actually, I spoke to him in his normal voice when I called. And it was interesting how different the two voices were, in fact. But he always had
and the vibe.
Yeah, he had a very relaxed, certainly a very relaxed demeanor at all times. So I think we get kind of a handle there that there was something remarkable and Casey-ish about Rick Thurston. And then Rick Thurston, through his association with Stan Fulham does a series of readings with him, and then boom, we get into this whole other kind of conversation. Quite remarkable. And then that leads to the October 13th prediction, and then boom, the October 13th prediction comes through. Pleiadian ships, or something is up there just hovering. Lots of people have cell phone footage of it. I've seen there are still plenty of YouTube videos available on it if you search October 13th, 2010 UFO sighting. It's remarkable, in fact. And I think that there's something almost, I don't want to say hypnotic, but unusual about the rhythms of the lights themselves. So I would highly recommend those videos. And when the program is over, I'm going to put some of those out supplementary on Twitter. Okay. A little more on the story now. That was one of those CBS video clips of those lights, and you can really get a handle on the lights taking place over here. And this is what would happen. There'd be those three lights sort of dancing together, and then suddenly there'd be a whole tapestry in the sky. Now, there's a couple of different things to keep in mind here. One, the UFO phenomena is real. There's no question about that. There's some kind of off-world aspect to it. There's also some kind of interdimensional aspect to it. But whatever it is, it's actual. We have people in, the generations here who have given that information to us. The UFO explosion of cases happened in 1947, but they were going on long before that. And of course, there's even biblical cases involving it. So the UFO reality is not something, it's a major piece of the X research and the research around the X technology. But the UFO file is something that we need to understand is also manipulated, so that when we see the CIA come out and say, oh, there's a UFO threat, we need money for it, they think about the kind of power they can get by dreaming up these evil aliens or good aliens. That's what the CIA does. But I think what we need to keep in mind is those things, like, we will be manipulated at times with their stories, like the Tic Tac junk and TTSA and Tom DeLonge and all that kind of nonsense, which we've covered extensively on this program. The Elizondo, CIA push, which is why Elizondo has his own, movie coming out, and his book, and they're all lining up, and he's on all these news shows, when in fact his information has been very, very spotty, and he's lied in public dramatically. So this is the kind of control that the Central Intelligence Agency has over the press, and they have such a great stake in all the work that they've done to conceal the UFO file for themselves, that they are delighted to have this kind of attention out there for somebody like DeLonge or like Elizondo. Elizondo being a very dubious character in this regard, just in terms of the things that he's presented. I don't know him personally, so I couldn't speak to anything about him personally, but in terms of the information he's brought forward, he's really been incredibly dodgy and sketchy. And anyone who wants real information on the UFO file, stay away from the CIA type. He's a 25-year CIA guy. I mean, you're not going to get the truth from the CIA, especially not on the UFO file, or they've killed people over that. This junk, the TTSA Tic Tac. Ooh, there's a Tic Tac type video. They came up with the Tic Tac marketing. So many people who have seen this, who are professionals that I've shown it to and gotten responses for. Some of them in physics. In fact, Russell Targ told me that this is not as presented at all. It's basically radar footage off a gun camera. It's so easy to manipulate what height or what speed it's traveling and all the rest. So what happened, we came into a real quandary in 2017. At the end, I want to kind of go into this in jump periods around here. On October 26, 2017, all of the JFK records were supposed to come out. They had been ordered by Congress in 1992 to come forward with this information by law. And you weren't supposed to be able to block it under any circumstances. However, the CIA director and the FBI director came to President Trump and said, don't let it out. Don't let these out. And he said, well, I have to let a certain amount of them out. And they said, these are the ones we don't want you to put out, including the Jim Garrison files, the New Orleans DA, who had pressed so close to the aerospace aspect and the CIA involvement in all of it. So they were able to block those files. In fact, what's going on is in November, they're supposed to now release the files that were blocked on October 26, 2017. So what happened was, and I'll go back into this, HBO got in touch with me and said, we want you to live stream your show for when these records come out. We want you to do your take on this stuff because you believe that there's a UFO aspect connected with the JFK assassination of the JFK records. So they come down and they shoot the show, and what happens is they don't, the Trump administration does not release the files. They block most of them. Yeah, what do you got?
I was thinking about the extra that they didn't include in the show of you walking
yeah.
being pissed off about it.
There's great footage of me walking around with an umbrella. But we did a whole show with them, and I don't want to say anything negative about HBO in this regard because they did a pretty professional job, and they asked a lot of good questions, and they
took it seriously.
Oh yeah, they did, and for better or for worse, like I gave them the report on it, and then right in that window, strange things started to happen. Like the Q stuff appeared. The TTSA suddenly did their thing where they unveiled Elizondo. And then in December, the New York Times picked up the story. It was like the end of 2017 had everything rolled into it. Very much like this 2010 story. But what was interesting was, again, what was presented by the New York Times, and they had all the dodgy Pentagon back and forth on this, and they were like, oh look, Elizondo, he's a whistleblower and he's coming forward with this information. And they presented him, they had this professional photographer present him as sullen and he's so angry at the government. This guy had worked for John Brennan, who was the CIA director known as the Drone King, and he'd worked for James Clapper, who was the national intelligence director. I mean, the DNI, this guy was so plugged into that intelligence system. The idea of him being disgruntled or a whistleblower is a joke. And they played this joke out with Elizondo dramatically over the course. They're still playing it out. It's 4 years later, basically. So, yeah. But what I think the thrust of it is, you had a chance, you had a kind of a piece out there with the Stan Fulham Transcender piece, and then this prediction coming forward about those UFOs in 2010. And then you get this kind of freak version of the CIA control over the UFO file. Now that shows up at the end of 2017. For me, I feel like I was present at both. And that, there's real disclosure and then there's CIA funny business disclosure. So what I want to say is that the point of view we have on this show is that, UFOs are absolutely real. I've talked to people who've encountered them, had sightings, and been abducted. I have no doubt at all that off-world civilizations are visiting here, and that the craft are advanced, and that we study their crashes and the way that they move, and so on. So there's no question about that. However, the presentation of the UFO thing and the manipulation around it, like we're seeing with the UAP nonsense, right? They try to rebrand it UAP to try to get congressional money. And so we're seeing so much of this that we have to look around and say, what was it? Like, what's taking place here? Why are they feeling the need to bring out the UFO file on their own terms? And they'll never share the genuine article, but they'll create this other version of it. But still, the timing again. Why are we in this period of time? When you look at the incredible pharmaceutical biofascism takeover, why now? Why didn't they pull this in 2001 when they were doing the Great War on Terror? Well, I guess they have their own schedule for things. But I would say that the biofascism piece and the UFO file piece are actually neck and neck, the two things that they think can bring them over the finish line. And the UFO, the false UFO threat on one side, and then on the other side, this incredible, takeover, pharmaceutical takeover of business. So we find ourselves kind of sitting in the middle of this and saying, why is it during the pandemic they were rolling out these characters like Elizondo and the whole TTSA push? We have to really answer those questions to get a handle on what's about to happen. And of course, we have so many hints and indications, like supply chains breaking down and inflation, So we're getting some piece, but we're all wondering what's the next thing they're going to do and how can we best cope with it in terms of really understanding what's happening. This is, I think, the place that we've arrived at. So
Can I throw you a question?
Yes.
I really love this question from a cult fan. It's speculation, but what would DJ think Rick Thurston's advice would be? It would really be the Transcenders for how we should approach the false UFO info, and what can we do to help the cause in general? What would the Transcenders say?
Oh, I think like the Casey work, the Casey thing is all about what do you do, and others can do as they may, but what are you putting forward? So it always comes back to the individual. I think the Transcenders were very much like that too. We don't want to be a victim in all this, and we don't want to identify too. That's part of, I think, the kind of psychological assessment that happens so often. And I think what we don't want to do is think of ourselves as a victim of this thing coming down on us. I remember there's a great quote. It's actually from Ronald Reagan's inauguration.
Really?
Speaking of UFOs, there's a lot of UFO Star Wars activity there with Reagan. But he says, I don't believe in a fate that will befall us that we can't do anything about. But I do believe that if we do nothing, then we're handing ourselves over to a dark fate. So so he did believe that, we needed to be active in it. And it's interesting with Reagan, there's fans and there's detractors, but I think this much we knew about Reagan, which is he had some understanding about principles, I think. And, there's a real kind of good, solid underpinning in that.
Can I ask you to tell a quick story?
Sure.
About Casey? I believe that there was a group of students, university students, who were praying one night, and the impact they had on a battle that you've told me a few times about group prayer.
There's no question. Well, there is, there's a lot of world affairs. That's a really interesting series of readings, actually. So I'm glad you brought that up. There's the world affairs readings, and they are really geared around people seeing these things happening with the shadows of World War II looming, which Casey really predicted extensively all the way back to the early 30s. But it is interesting because they're asking him, what can we do? And how can we prevent an invasion of the mainland USA? And the group that had gathered together was small. I think it was about 35 people. And Casey suggested that if everyone there prayed and lived the prayer of protection, that there would be no invasion of the United States. It's pretty remarkable when you think about it. That's not a lot of people. So I believe that the way that Casey was putting it across was, we have the ability to change things and change conditions through our own activities and through our own thoughts and through our own intentions. And so we should be about doing that. But it is interesting that, this power of prayer has been pointed to dramatically in the Casey reading. So certainly there's a huge place for it.
And ultimately, and a lot of people have cited this, if what we thought didn't matter, they wouldn't be working so hard to control our thoughts, to brainwash us.
Oh, absolutely.
So obviously there's a lot of power there and we should seize it, right?
No question about it. Well, one of the remarkable things is the mystery schools brought forward the concept that thoughts are things. If you look at the thought form books that Besant did with Ledbetter, they are remarkable in the kind of thought forms that happen when people are listening to classical music or something versus having an argument. They're creating different types of thought forms. One of the things that they brought forward was that all of these stories and the negative headline grabbing type stuff that would take place, they would try to get people not to follow that because it was polluting their own stream of consciousness. So the idea that we can think ourselves into a better reality, I think, is absolutely true if it's backed up, especially with solid activity on the ground. But thoughts are things. This is the first rule in the mystery schools. So you're thinking and projecting that better reality is absolutely crucial. The other thing is when they asked Casey in a reading, what does this mean? Thoughts are things. And he said, thoughts are things and just as real as a pin in the hand. Think of that. That's pretty real. So it's very important that we originate with the thoughts coming from a very healthy place. And even under the kind of chaos that we're witnessing in the onslaught on humanity of these forces who are really trying to create a global dictatorship, with Stepford Biden and the psychopath in Canada, and the things that we're seeing in Australia. I mean, we're in the middle of a maelstrom. There's no question about it. But I think it's through this interaction and what we do in the ideas room, actually, where we engage different types of energies, different types of solutions. And I think if we can get a handle on some of the things that take place around us and this UFO aspect, I think it's going to be absolutely crucial.
I know that my consciousness changes when I'm in the ideas room. And I know that other people feel the same way and that I have more insights and I know that they're true, they're real. And then I'm on my own and then doubt creeps in and fear creeps in. But when I'm here, I feel stronger. I feel more confident, have much more faith. And I know that that's coming from a place of greater truth.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. It's quite incredible. The group intention aspect. And, so often it's interesting with what we're doing here because we're presenting you news and stories from a journalistic perspective, but then the things that we're unearthing go very deep on the spiritual side, on the esoteric side, on the deep state side. So we're kind of have an interesting combination, I would say, that's pretty unusual between what goes on here in the ideas room and what we're doing with the show. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist series episode X-111. We're going deep now into this 2022 warning, and I'm going to get into those pieces as we go. We're going to be taking your questions in the second half of this program, which is coming up really soon. And how are the questions out there?
Really good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just on a side note, so Dee wants to know the name of the HBO special.
Oh, yeah, it's right there on the Dark Journalist channel.
So it was Vice, right?
Yeah, it's HBO Vice News, and I think they called it like the Trump document dump conspiracy. And it's basically, they ran it now for the 54th anniversary of the JFK assassination. And actually, what are we coming up to now? It's the 58th. So it's already 4 years ago. And we have some incredible JFK information coming up for you for that anniversary. You know, it's pretty interesting. I want to mention this, which is Oliver Stone came out with his new version of JFK. It's a documentary going over all the facts and revisiting everything after 30 years. And he's really going deep. The thing is remarkable, but it has been so banned in the United States. It's got full distribution in Europe and Asia, but the United States, unbelievable. Well, he came forward about 2 days ago and said, I finally got a distributor. I'm not going to mention who it is in the United States for this. So we're going to be seeing that in November. And it is JFK revisited through the looking glass. Cannot wait for this to come out. Stone is a masterful filmmaker, but when he gets around these topics, he's unstoppable. And his knowledge around the Kennedy assassination and its impact is phenomenal. He doesn't get into the UFO file, don't get me wrong. But nonetheless, it's absolutely incredible. A couple of things there about JFK. A story came out. And this is interesting. I want to mention this. There were a series of pictures that came out in the Arizona Republic. This was in late July of 1978, and this was the series of photos. And they were looking for people associated with the assassination. They wanted to identify certain types of people. And it turned out that there was some interesting uncovering, and there's a file that has been sealed by the Central Intelligence Agency about someone named Capehart. So an article, a very interesting article came out, and rare these days, in Santa Barbara News called The Capehart Case, What is the CIA Hiding? The title of it is The Central Intelligence Agency Doesn't Want You to Know the Truth About Claude Barnes Capehart. Let's take a minute on this. Mr. Capehart claimed to have been a CIA asset present at the assassination of President John F. Kennedy in 1963. The hidden truth about Mr. Capehart has been glossed over for almost 60 years. Surveys show that most of the public believes the crime is unsolved, and only 20% believe Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone assassin. That's remarkable. Think about it. Even with all the CIA media brainwashing, only 20% believe that official story, which is a total joke. And it shouldn't even be that high. Next month, with the government's final release of secret JFK assassination documents, the truth about Mr. Capehart may finally be known. This goes to what I was saying when we started the program. In November, there's something that Trump set up, which is supposed to be the release of the rest of the CIA records pertaining to the JFK assassination. Finally, do you think 58 years is long enough? Most of the countries that they're talking about, the Soviet Union, don't even exist anymore. I think we can look at that stuff without any national security implications. Claude Barnes Capehart was living in Chowchilla, in California's Madera County in 1978, when most newspapers printed a government request for information about 3 persons of interest in a photo taken at the assassination scene. Capehart's girlfriend, Faye Weaver, recognized him as one of them. Mr. Capehart at first denied, then confirmed that it was he. These are the photographs, as I mentioned. Now, this is interesting. He told her he had worked as a hitman for the CIA on numerous occasions, retiring in 1975. He told Ms. Weaver he was present with Lee Harvey Oswald at the scene of the JFK assassination. He said 2 others were with Oswald and that it was not Oswald who shot the president. Ms. Weaver related this to Chowchilla's resident deputy sheriff, Sergeant Dale Four. She told Sergeant Four that Capehart was paranoid about his photograph in the newspaper and left Chowchilla a few days later after threatening her not to talk. Ms. Weaver said Mr. Capehart had passports bearing his photo with assumed names and numerous firearms, including power rifle with scope and a silenced handgun. She also saw items taken from the CIA spy ship Glomar Explorer. Now, this is interesting because this is the CIA ship that the intelligence agencies got Howard Hughes to build. And they were like, oh, we're going to go look for Soviet subs. But in fact, they were using that thing to go into the hot zone. Okay, what else have we got here? Sergeant Four had met Mr. Capehart on several occasions, and Mr. Capehart had told him he had retired from the CIA. He operated a well drilling business, and Sergeant Four noticed that he always had a bundle of cash. Well, that's pretty handy. When Ms. Weaver showed Four the newspaper photographs of the three persons of interest, Sergeant Four found one to be a dead ringer for Capehart and recorded several conversations with Ms. Weaver. This isn't all in the late 70s. As Madera County District Attorney, I also interviewed her. This is the guy writing the story, as did FBI Special Agent Tom Walsh. We all found Ms. Weaver credible. Let's watch how this story goes. Sergeant Ford took his evidence to Washington, D.C., where he met Richard Billings, editorial director of the House Select Committee on Assassination, and other FBI agents. The committee never investigated Mr. Capehart's claims about the JFK assassination. A committee memo suggests Mr. Capehart be interviewed by the FBI, but it never happened. The committee's final report, however, released in 1979, supported Mr. Capehart's statement. The assassination, it concluded, was the result of a conspiracy and at least one gunman other than Oswald, and with gunshots coming from different directions. Later, both the committee's editorial director, Billings, and its special counsel faulted the CIA for lack of cooperation. Yeah, it was too late. Should have hit them hard at the time. Of course, they're not going to cooperate. They're involved. Later, both the committee's editorial director, Billings, and its special counsel, Robert Blakey, I already read that. In 1988, District Attorney Investigator Dan Poole traced Mr. Capehart to Pahrump, Nevada. Now, I'm going to tell you what's weird about this, which is, one, Pahrump, Nevada was home of Art Bell at the very end of his life. That's where he decided to retire to. Number two, it's also in my documentary. It's close by to Rose Wells, which is where Bruce Morgan, Yvonne DiCarlo's son, indicates there were crashed UFOs. So people seem to know something about Pahrump, and especially on the CIA side. Okay, so this district attorney investigator, Dan Poole, traces him to Pahrump, Nevada. Let's keep going. This story just came out. Mr. Poole and I plan to confront Mr. Capehart at home in an attempt to find out his true relationship with the CIA. We arranged for a Nye County Sheriff Sergeant to accompany us and agreed upon a date in 2 weeks. A few days later, Capehart was found dead in his front yard of an apparent heart attack. I then sued the CIA in federal court for the information. The CIA claimed national security, the ultimate. The court ruled for the CIA, and I appealed. In 1994, an appeals court ruled the CIA was exempt from the Freedom of Information Act's disclosure provisions, but observed that concerns about the role of the CIA played in the Kennedy assassination have not yet been laid to rest. Big surprise. Later, an assassination records review board was created to collect all the relevant JFK assassination records. In 1998, the board issued its final report. It confirmed that Claude Bard's Capehart was employed on the CIA spy ship Glomar Explorer. As for other involvement, the board found no evidence to suggest Capehart worked for the CIA on any additional contracts. The CIA still claims its only connection with Mr. Capehart was his employment on the spy ship from 1973 to 1975. The claim is false, and formerly secret documents prove it. Only 4 days after President Kennedy's assassination in 1963, the CIA requested a name check on Capehart from other federal agencies. Secret government documents about Capehart include one sealed envelope, information inclusive dates 63 to 75. In other words, this guy was doing covert operations for the CIA from 63 to 75, and that's something that are in those records. It's another reason why they don't want that out there. Now, we know that the JFK records, they're not going to have any smoking guns in them. They got rid of that a long time ago. But nonetheless, those records, and the reason they want to keep them is they don't want any of these connections out, like the strange story of Mr. Capehart. Finally, and a 1973 CIA letter of assignment and investigative transmittal designates Capehart as covert instead of as a field operative. The CIA's secret documents about Mr. Capehart end in 1975, the same year he told them he retired from the agency. And so on it goes. But that story is particularly interesting, and I think that that's something that will play out on the John F. Kennedy story in relation to those records coming out. And again, I don't expect them to release the core CIA documents. I think they're going to try to continue to punt, and I think with Stepford Biden in office, they'll be successful. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. We are here on X Series 111. We're going to be taking your questions shortly. I have a couple more pieces. How are you doing?
Good. Susie says Harry Reid is from Pahrump, Nevada too.
Oh.
And Koldasi said Pahrump, Nevada is where the aliens land in Mars attacks.
Well, that's hilarious. Excellent. How can we jump from Pleiadians to, from assassination to Pleiadians? You tell me. This is what we're going to do right now. This idea of benevolent aliens out there coming to interfere on our behalf, and that there's a galactic council and all the rest. This has been counteracted very often with the whole idea of the Greys abducting people, and so we have kind of a schizophrenic model in relation to this. Yeah.
Sorry, Nick Malone says lots of hookers in Pahrump.
Oh my goodness.
I'm sure.
So yeah. Well, I was thinking, what's his name? Lazar. He owned something like a brothel out there. Stunning, very strange story with Lazar. Still many pieces missing. But when we go and take a look at this, I think that we're looking at something along the lines of there are different types of groups that visit, and the majority of alien groups that visit haven't done anything hostile. That's pretty clear. And it apparently, when we look at this now, the Pleiadians have some kind of a shoot down order on them when their ships are operative. So the Pleiadians are the ones that we've decided we don't want to, kind of get involved with. They wanted to get involved with the Greys. Interestingly enough, you got more.
Sorry. Well, I have a question coming about Shatner going to space, but Poopa Fighter said to believe Shatner, TJ Hooker. It's just
Shatner did go into space, and it's pretty appropriate. Unfortunately, he did it for the Amazon weirdness with Bezos and all that. So I don't have.
I think he was just thrilled, to be able to do it.
No question. I don't have a lot of patience for the billionaires in space thing either, as it turns out. But I think that, we are getting this idea, and it's come out through documents. It's come out through MJ12. And this is an idea. We can't say that it's a fact because there's never been anything on the UFO file that would help us to conclude that. But there's an idea out there that the Greys have worked with us for their own benefit in order to be able to abduct humans sort of out in the open. And that there is some kind of treaty with the Greys. The Pleiadian side is very interesting because there's stories about the Pleiadians visiting high officials. Of course, Valthor is one of those stories. But there's a very credible story about a space group visiting Eisenhower. And it's so credible, in fact, that Stanton Friedman, who I think was really remarkable and detail-oriented, and not somebody given at all to flights of fancy in relation to the UFO story, he went very in-depth with me a couple of times, and he was on the program a few times before he passed away, really giving incredible info about these people he interviewed and the documents he found relating to this missing gap of time where Eisenhower in 1954 said he was going to the dentist while he was in California, but in fact showed up at this air base, and they had a kind of a welcoming ceremony for the ship, and that he went on board and came back. That story, I do think, has a lot of legs to it. And I think the idea is that they were seeing us test out these hydrogen bombs, and they were trying to give us a heads up that if we used them, the consequences would be irreversible. So this gets to, just like a lot of our nuclear testing, the kind of problems that we've had with the atmosphere. And there's so much of a difficult conversation about things about the environment because it's so overused by the mainstream media, covert climate change, all these types of things, and they're trying to get a carbon tax, and so much of what they've said has turned out to be lies. Nonetheless, there's been some serious damage to the environment, regardless of how they try to manipulate it. Again, we always have to observe the rules of dark journalism in order to get to the story. There's the official narrative, which is generally done to protect the institutions, and it's always a lie. Then there's the secondary story, where the really good scientists, the really good researchers, the really good writers come forward, and that's often called the conspiracy theory. And then underneath that is the junk conspiracy, which is supposed to drive everybody back to the official story. So what's interesting about this to me is the idea that these groups like Pleiadians would be involved in attempting to repair our atmosphere from damage, and that they have done their own outreach to the governments of the world in a very clandestine fashion, so as not to rock the boat. We have a lot of stories about human-looking aliens, and very often these are the kind of the good aliens, for want of a better word. They're trying to move the culture in a better direction. In the case of what we identify as Pleiadians, they're always very human-looking, and they seem to have a spiritual message attached to them. Now, again, that's an echo, too, from earlier days, when even in the Egyptian times, we can see there's some relationship with a different type of group. If you look at some of the earlier mystery school work, they talk about groups visiting from other worlds, from the outer spheres, and so on. So we have some background there of interrelationship. The question is, where is that relationship now? So there's something in the work of the Transcenders, in the work of Stan Fulham, bringing it forward, that suggests, the Greys are the ones who are generally working with the government, and that's not a perfect relationship, and it's not a very extensive relationship, but it does exist, and that the Pleiadians are the one who said, we can't help you or, give you access to advanced technology where you might blow yourselves up, but we can give you spiritual advice and cultural advice, and that we rejected them and sort of worked with the Greys. That's a story that's out there, and from a number of different sources. I think that we can use it as a sketch outline as we go forward here. Now, here's something interesting. In the work of the Transcenders, they identify the Greys as coming from a star system called the Boötes. So not Zeta Reticuli, not those different ones. We're getting a very clear indication. I have never heard the Boötes mentioned in relation to a space group. So let's find out just a little bit about the Boötes here. In ancient Babylon, the stars of the Boötes were known as Shupa. They were apparently depicted as the god Enlil, who is leader of the Babylonian pantheon and special patron of farmers. Boötes may have been represented by the animal four-legged constellation in ancient Egypt, resembling that of an ox, sufficiently to have been originally proposed as the foreleg of an ox, by Berio. Homer mentions Botes in the Odyssey as a celestial reference for navigation, describing it as a late setting or slow to set. Exactly whom Botes is supposed to represent in Greek mythology is not clear. According to one version, he's a son of Demeter, twin brother of Plutus, a plowman who drove the oxen in the constellation Ursa Major. This agrees with the constellation's name. The ancient Greeks saw the asterism, now called the Big Dipper, or plow, as a cart with oxen. Some myths say the Botes invented the plow and was memorialized for its ingenuity as a constellation, and yet another myth associated with the Botes, by Hyginus, is that of Icarius, who was schooled as a grape farmer and winemaker by Dionysius, which is all kinds of mystical states associated there. Icarius made wine so strong that those who drank it appeared poisoned, which caused shepherds to avenge their supposedly poisoned friends by killing Icarius. So there's all kinds of strangeness going on in relation to the Botes. But what I think eventually happened with this is that, it's an unusual identification in ancient times. Chinese constellations had it. Arcturus was part of the most prominent of these, variously designated as the Celestial King's throne. So we've got something unusual and maybe unexplored about the Botes. That's Bootes. And they have these little emphasis umlauts above the O's. So I've heard that pronunciation all over the board, but Botes, I think, is pretty much.
Well, that's how the Transcenders pronounced it, right?
They did, yes. And they spoke extensively when I talked to them about it. And the Botes is now one of 88 modern constellations. It contains the fourth brightest star in the night sky, the orange giant Arcturus. Now, this is interesting because Arcturus was described by Edgar Cayce as the doorway out of this system, that you achieve a certain level through reincarnation, you advance to a certain level, and then the next system, you go through Arcturus. So there's something very unusual about the identification of the Botes with the Greys by the Transcenders, and thoroughly original, so I think we should investigate a little bit. I'm going to read a couple of the designations that were given by the Transcenders to Fulham relating to the Greys. Let's see if I can get through these, and then we're going to take your questions coming up real shortly here. Okay. The Botes, very scientific race, non-emotional. They do not understand or comprehend or react to that of emotional reality. All things are based on the scientific approach and logic. They do not have feelings about things. They do not react emotionally to that which we react. All things are based on logic, so their life forte is science, to understand, to take apart and put together. The why behind the why. As such, extreme emotional circumstances will upset their analytical patterns. They become very unfocused, and they are often seen on Earth. They are about 1 meter tall, with large bald heads, large black almond-shaped eyes. We've seen the Greys many times. Small slits for nose and mouth, and a grayish complexion. The most common alien to visit Earth. They can also alter their appearance to achieve certain effects in their abduction program. They have strong idiosyncrasies. For example, they do not eat in front of one another. I don't know exactly what that part means, but I think that there's a lot there in relation to these groups that we can learn from these descriptions. Here's what the Transcenders had to say about the Pleiadians, and this is Stan Fulham interpreting there in his third edition of the book, Challenges of Change. The Pleiades exist in our third dimensional reality, but their life forms are very high and very close to a fifth dimensional expression. And as such, they can transition to a lower dimensional reality, but they cannot go to a higher dimensional reality. Basically, one can reduce its vibrational level, but cannot increase it without actually being of that dimension. They are closer to light than we are. Pleiadians are most like Earthlings in appearance because of their higher dimensional reality. They can modify their appearance to fit in with Earth reality. They exist amongst us today, and they have for many years. They play a role of peacemaker among nations, normally in advisory position, never in a leadership role, because they would regard that as an infringement on the free will and choice of humanity. They are very intellectual and artistic. They are noted for their music and dance, but their artistry would be somewhat different from Earth's, because the Pleiadians do not have the wide emotional energies that we have. In fact, the emotional energies of the Earth are unique in the universe. The Pleiadians are a kind and compassionate race, and this is recognized throughout the universe. The Pleiadians have the greatest space travel technology. Their navigators are sought throughout the universe for their expertise and ability to move through dimensions, through time. Their systems of travel are the most complex and advanced in existence. So we're getting that indication there that they've been on this course of interacting with us, and since Atlantean times. These are the types of things that I got from talking with the Transcenders, that the Pleiadians had been around in Atlantis and had seen them develop technologically and even helped them, and then ended up feeling really bad about that endeavor because the Atlanteans would use the two-eye crystal to decimate their entire continent and the world. So there's something very interesting about that relationship over time, but some historically spiritual, religious things obviously are involved with the Pleiadians. So we have that long-term relationship with them. This incident, October 13th, 2010, according to the Transcenders, was the way that the Pleiadians were kind of introducing themselves and saying, we're going to be working on your atmosphere and you're going to see us. So this is, the thrust of that story and where it's going. And it's going to be important as we move forward just to understand who these groups are. I think that it is curious, in fact, that the Pleiadians, one of the things about the Pleiadians that the Transcenders said to me was that they had learned about humanity over time by being among us. And one of the things, and I said, well, what would they do? Like, was there any particular type of role that they would play? Were they politicians or priests or what? And what the Transcender said was that they were blacksmiths. And that was so interesting to me because the blacksmith always had an unusual reputation, dealing with fire and dealing with all these different types of things. So I think that there's something very interesting in that description, and maybe something where we can learn the root of the Pleiadians in society by tracking things like that down in relation to these stories. And with that, Miss Olivia, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Right, the Philip K. Dick Film Festival wants to know, so what happens in 2022? I think I missed it too. Did you discuss it?
No, okay. I'm going to go into the questions. I have it here. I have it segued here in 2022, and we are going to get into it for sure. But I think we should jump on the questions, and then I'll get into the section.
So Alan Carter wants to know, Steiner made predictions about the very time we're in now, but did he ever mention UFOs or anything related to the UFO file?
Oh, he definitely mentioned this. And what I think is fascinating, anthroposophy and theosophy, they're trying to give us the UFO part, knowing that it's going to be a big piece of our reality coming up. But they don't want to kind of force it into the narrative because they're already bringing up ascended masters and things that are crucial in our spiritual development. So they certainly refer to, for example, in the Casey work, he talks about how we take on different types of bodies in different types of planetary lives. So when we reincarnate, we actually can reincarnate in Venus, in a Venus body, which is very close to a human body. Now, but it's not a regular physical because the conditions are so different, just like on Neptune. And, so we go through these different stages. we're actually going through these different planetary stages as kind of like classrooms. And we're learning different aspects and so on. And very often our chart through astrology will bear witness to where we just were and what we just learned, for example, Venus or Mars or Mercury, whatever it happens to be, Jupiter, the giver of gifts. So this, I think, is a really powerful way to look at it, that they were giving us that planetary aspect, and they were also mentioning, just like Casey's talking about a priestess in the Atlantean land, and he says, well, she was preparing herself to deal with these off-world visitors, those that were coming in. So it's there. It's just it's not so focused on. And when they asked Casey, is there any physical life on any of the planets in our system? Casey makes a very interesting answer. He says, at present, no. As if to say, certainly at one point there was. And this is part of what I think they've hidden through NASA. And I think we have those hints through 2001, etc. So, yeah, absolutely fascinating. Yes.
Kontiki Man, is it clear how these transcenders can reach ages over 40,000 years, or why they would even care about us, as Earth itself will survive?
How the Transcenders would?
Yeah, well,
or
the
Pleiadians?
No, the Transcenders are a group of I mean, they're
43,000 souls.
Okay.
And when they go...
Where are the souls from?
Well, for example, among them is Casey, right? Among them are these different spiritual
So are they
leaders.
only human souls, or some of them avatars? Are they ascended beings? Are they
I would
perhaps
yeah,
angels of some
No,
kind in the hierarchy? Or are they all...
definitely. I
Okay.
think that they're said to be a group of souls who have advanced, and they've gone through that reincarnational cycle and advanced, and so therefore they're kind of operating almost, this is kind of the ascended masters stories. They have the ability to influence our reality, and what they do is they'll select somebody like a Casey or like a Rick Thurston to come through and give that higher information through. So it is very interesting. That's a spiritual group that's dedicated to moving forward the culture and moving forward the spiritual understanding of mankind. That's what they're there for.
Can we stay on that for a minute? Because, everybody
Yes.
has been asking, this is just going to constantly come up again and again, what can we do to sort of save ourselves, right? And if there are these groups, Rick isn't with us anymore, right?
True.
But obviously these entities, this group of entities is still devoted on some level of helping us rise and save ourselves. So we can meditate, we can reach out to them, we can try to communicate with them.
Oh, there's no question. And, there's all various types of spiritual practices in mystery school literature that are geared toward exactly doing that. Even in Rudolf Steiner's work, and in Theosophy, certainly, in the Casey work, there are all kinds of attunement exercises. And I do think that it's interesting on the mystery school side, what they talk about are the two principles, attunement and service. And so very often, I think, we see the attunement part taking place. People are fascinated by the tools of attunement, and, it is quite remarkable. But the attunement has to be backed up with service, or it becomes something that's like a pot over boiling. And so the service part has to be a crucial piece in all this. And that's why if you look at some of the Search for God groups and the recommendations, somebody comes in and says, what should I do? I really want to access my psychic ability. And what's the first thing I should do? And Casey gives them the advice of pushing the elderly along in a wheelchair by Virginia Beach. So, these things that would put you in the right state that are service-oriented. And, we see this all the time. I particularly see it with moms. They're so service-oriented generally that they seem to have access to this kind of spiritual, psychic reality in a much easier fashion because they're so geared towards service. But I think there's no doubt about it that it's a twin action. It's attunement, and then the service is kind of the fulfillment of the attunement. Yes.
Topicum says, are you familiar with the Billy Meier's case? Of course we are. He has loads of information and proofs about Pleiadians or Pleiadian.
Yes.
Please take a look. A lot connected to theosophy.
I will say this about Meier, and we know that there was a lot of funny business there in that case, and it became very difficult. But when, Timothy Good, who I did one of his last interview, actually, that he's ever done. And he was a phenomenal UFO writer who wrote Above Top Secret. British guy, is just phenomenal researcher. But he said that he had met Billy Meier in the 60s and considered him absolutely authentic. Billy Meier was doing work in India around UFOs at that period. Later, when he went to visit him, he had an unusual encounter and a feeling like something like a cult had built up around Meier. Meier's an unusual story. It's a great mix of transformational interaction on one side, and then almost laughable, hoaxing on the other. And then there's also a lot of targeting of Meier too. So it's a mixed up story. But there's no question that Billy Meier was deeply involved with revealing things and really putting the Pleiadian part front and center, which I find pretty interesting, actually. And Billy Meier does show up in the Transcender material as one of the kind of benchmarks of the Pleiadian contact. But what he suggests there, which I think is interesting, is that there was kind of a scientific study group that was contacting people from the Pleiades, and it was a small scientific research group, and that is where Meier had his initial contact. Later, it appeared to go south, but it was interesting and eye-opening in the beginning, no question about it. A couple of quick things to put across in terms of the masks and all the rest. I do want to get these on the record. Again, talking about industrial pollution, nuclear tests, and other things that have disturbed the atmosphere, and also Earth changes coming and such. So Stan Fulham is very concerned. He has these sessions, these little back and forth sessions with the Transcenders. So I'm going to try to get through some of the key ones as we go here. Just to remind you, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. We're going deep now on the Transcenders, Stan Fulham, and this is X Series 111. Okay. So he's talking about CO2 and what's in the atmosphere. And he talks about it, and the Transcenders say critical mass is 22%. Mankind will not survive within that critical amount in your atmosphere. There are serious health impacts long before that critical point is reached. In fact, as you are experiencing now in some parts of the world with the present expansion of pollution, you will be in a grave difficulty in the period from 2012 to 2015, as some scientists have warned. To reverse the situation at that point would be impossible. You need some form of intervention. The carbon dioxide intrusion into your atmosphere is irreversible with mankind's technology. It has critical timing now that is upon you. You cannot simply go back to 2012, go beyond 2012 and not make substantial changes. There were, in fact, a lot of curbs that were put in the system, oddly enough. Now, this I found particularly interesting. So Stanley is talking about China is planning on building coal-fired power plants, 1 per week in 2010. And then he goes through these different statistics about industrial pollution and how the corporations have played this little game of making these incredible profits while destroying the environment and then, the idea is that they're trying to come to us to make us pay for the cleanup of them making all this money. The Transcenders say here that it's pretty indicated. You have indicated that people are already dying from CO2 pollution in some Chinese cities. People wear masks all day and sleep with them, an ominous warning of the critical mass ahead. But you've stated there'll be a massive destruction of cities and industries, and transportation services will have collapsed as a result of Earth changes. And so the Transcenders say, yes, the future Earth changes may do this on a massive scale. Ironically, if mankind averts the Earth changes, then you will change the Earth by virtue of your increasing environmental pollution. So is it going to happen naturally, or is it going to happen unnaturally? Free will and choice play a dominant role. Mankind has to determine whether his home, the Earth, is as valuable as his needs and desires. And so this is a reflection on getting that leadership that we need to kind of make that type of transition. I find it quite fascinating that the date that they pick in here for this kind of major difficulty in relation to the environment is 2022. So we have to take a look at this situation and think, they've been mining things to make iPhones. They've been doing incredible over-the-top technology. They have been doing all of the incredible oil pollution. They have been doing all the incredible destruction of the environment. And these are things that they haven't made any accounting of. They've made little initiatives like, oh, we're great, but they're very cosmetic. So they've allowed us to go into this period. So what's specifically interesting to me is when he's talking about respiratory issues, and then you see them, with the whole bioweapon thing that's come out and all the things that have happened as a result. I keep linking the things that the Transcenders are trying to get out to us about the incredible devastation to the atmosphere relating to nuclear tests, industrial pollution, and all the rest of it, which is a direct reflection on our leaders, and the things that are going on to, in essence, depopulate. There's a certain point in that book where he says they will have to deindustrialize to a point, and that they can't to try to solve their problem through depopulation is just this, like, incredibly unethical violation. And so there's a weird kind of spiritual zeitgeist in the work. Yes.
B. Nickel says the Transcenders come across as like a fake news agency trying to shove the Pleiadians down our throats. I want you to address that, because the Transcenders, talk about a lot of things, not just the Pleiadians. This is just sort of a focus of the show.
Yeah. As I said, they focus on the alien aspect, just like when you go to the Casey work and you look and you see, like the Atlantis part, there's 900 readings that mention Atlantis. You have really deep information about it. Atlantis is mentioned through other sources, but there's nothing with that kind of detailed information. By the time you get to the Transcenders talking about aliens, it's the same thing. Their alien tapestry is like nothing else. It really has groups in there: Orions, the Greys, from the Botes.
What is that weird group that we've never heard of?
Pulsati. Pulsatis are a very strange group. There are others as well. And actually, I can read a couple of those descriptions. I'd like to. But I think that the answer to your question is, I think that they're revealing the Pleiadians. I don't think that they're pushing them. I think that they're trying to say, look, you're interested in this off-world cultures that are visiting you. The main group associated with the Earth is the Pleiadians. And that the Greys are like a weird, they're also heavily, it's basically the Pleiadians and the Greys that are majorly involved with Earth development. However, it seems like they do come down on the side that the Pleiadians are much more beneficial. than the scientifically oriented grays, who are basically here to scoop people up and, do their own genetic experiments in order to repopulate their own race. So I think there's an obvious difference there. Fake news, we have to be careful when we use terms. We have to use terms very specifically, very accurately. So the idea of fake news in the question, that's kind of the part that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. How is there fake news in that? So let's try to be spot on when we ask things. Let's not just throw in a buzz term. Yes.
Okay. Michael Snow, was the Rendlesham Forest event back in 1980 a contact event with future Greys via Peniston's binary download, describing a need for DNA for a future form of Greys?
Well, this is pretty interesting. I spoke to Peniston, and it's one of those strange things that we didn't actually end up doing an interview. But I always thought his story was fascinating, and the case itself, the Rendlesham Forest case, is remarkable. His part of it being that he saw the craft, and when he put his hands on these symbols that were almost like digital symbols that were raised off the craft, that he got a really strong impression and later wrote it down as a bunch of zeros and ones. When somebody converted that into kind of latitude, longitude, it turned out to be where High Brazil was. They're close to the UK, very unusual. And that part of Peniston's story, look, all of the people involved in Rendlesham Forest had some remarkable aspect. On this program, I talk about apotheum, APOTHEUM. This is the physical reality distortion field that happens involving the X technology. The UFO file, the reason that those things are merged and that the X technology resides inside the UFO file is because the UFOs have that exact effect. But there are other people who've achieved those types of effects, like Nikola Tesla, for example. He caused an earthquake in Manhattan 100 years before the Pleiadians showed up there. It's pretty good to cause an earthquake in 1903. That's special stuff. But, Tesla comes up for a reason, because there are so many realities and there's so many things that we can do technologically and spiritually to scientifically to bring about a higher order of living. For example, in that period, 1909, when he's building this tower, he's telling J.P. Morgan, look, not only can we beam communications, we can beam energy. Do you get it? That means your whole oil paradigm, you're not going to need it, because I can wirelessly beam not only instructions and remote control, I can beam energy. Nobody has to pay for energy ever again. So that's why they embark on a 50-year defamation thing. And one of the things my dad used to tell me, it was kind of fascinating, which was that Tesla was a very underground character when he was growing up. Like, you'd really have to dig around for it. We've discovered him. We've rediscovered him, right, on a major level. But in that period, when he actually was around, and then afterwards, they really marginalized him. And there's a reason for that, because when you get around this X technology, when you get around these large-scale energy solutions, if people follow in that direction, you're going to make breakthroughs, and it's going to mess up everything that these other groups are doing. So we have to be very conscious of that and use those great pioneers and people like Tesla, Keeley, and others as stepping stones in our own understanding that we're not being given the whole truth in relation to advanced energy and alternative energies at all. Anybody who studies that stuff gets killed, right? Or sent to prison. So, obviously there's some incredible, kind of lock on this, that they don't want this going forward. And we've known this. I mean, it's so obvious, but at the same time, just as humanity goes, to be in such a ridiculous bind, not having the advanced technology of the energy, and to have this biofascism coming down on us, and the Stepford Biden in control, with Nancy Pelosi. I mean, it's a pretty low state of affairs for where we should be. I think if you were to chart the 60s and the 70s and where people thought we were going, where we were going to be, and where we are, obviously something's gone off into a ditch. And, we need to kind of control that aircraft carrier and turn it around. I don't think there's any doubt about that. You're talking about the power of prayer. We need a really, really big prayer for that one. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. We're going to take more of your questions. Go for it.
I just wanted to throw this out here.
Yes.
TRM says Billy Myers has the 500 million for human population as well. No thanks. I think 500 million is just.
Is he saying, Billy Meier is saying that's ideal?
Yeah, that's just way too few.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, even if we all can admit that maybe the planet's overpopulated, 500 million is a pittance for this planet.
I don't think it's about overpopulation, honestly. I think it's about the rate of overpopulation. And yet, the leadership never had that discussion with the public. What they did was they were like, we're going to push them over a cliff. We're going to let them ratchet up, large scale credit. We're going to let them ratchet up all this stuff. We'll use them to go to wars. We'll use them to steal the money in the background. They'll be our taxpayer base. If you go back to the 1980s, it's quite remarkable because that culture needs the society. It needs the middle class. It needs everybody because they're at war with another culture, the Soviet Union. So, we have to kind of go on a deep turn with this. This culture is being targeted by its own leadership. They're trying to get rid of their own people. It's a totally different reality. In the 80s, they might have been trying to harvest them or keep them in a mind control state so that they would go along with the things that they wanted them to do. But that's a totally different type of thing. It's much more benign than the kind of insanity that we're seeing now, where they're just like, well, you know what? We never had those important discussions with you about aliens, population. We benefited so much from the energy paradigm. We benefited so much from the X technology through the UFO file. And we're just, we're going to say that you're the problem now, and here's your mandate. You're going to lose your job. And eventually, they're trying to use the anti-vaccine term. I mean, basically, we're talking about how this should be like the N-word or something. This is
an unacceptable insult.
Label.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable what they're trying to do. So this is where the rubber meets the road. There's no way to get around this without some kind of clash between those who are sane and those who have been mentally controlled. What these people are banking on, and I've talked with Catherine Fitz about this, these people are banking on the fact that the mind control is powerful enough. She doesn't think it is, and I don't think it is. But I think the people involved are very dangerous, obviously. But I would think, if anything, people involved, the thing that they fear the most, as we found out during lockdowns and things like that, were people talking to each other. That with the incredible exchange of ideas and thoughts in the ideas from just a conversation like what we're having right now, these are the types of things that can open us to those larger realities. And I think that is going to go a long way in the grand scheme of things. One other thing. You mentioned the Pulsatis.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to give a little overview of the Pulsatis. The Pulsatis almost sound a little bit like a parable. So 2 quick things. I'm going to touch here on Eisenhower's piece. This comes out of the Transcenders information. Okay. President Eisenhower had the unique experience of actually meeting and talking to aliens. In 1954, 5 spaceships landed at Edwards Air Force Base in California, and the aliens asked to meet with the president, who was golfing at Palm Springs. They looked very human and spoke English. Indeed, they were Pleiadians. The President Eisenhower was rushed to the base where he met and talked to the Pleiadians. They demonstrated the maneuverability of their UFOs and instantly made themselves invincible, which they easily do by transferring their bodies to the normal higher vibrational levels. President Eisenhower and his companion Robert Saunders were invited on board the UFO. They were given an introduction to the technology of the spacecraft and then were taken on a flight into space and exploration of the Earth through alien eyes, so to speak. Eisenhower, Saunders, and other officials who experienced this strange alien encounter have since passed away, but there are members of their families who are well aware of this incident. The Pleiadians said they wanted to begin an education program for the people on Earth. This is very interesting. To make mankind aware of the universe and its extraterrestrial existence. Eisenhower was not one to make impulsive choices or decisions, so he asked for a great deal of information. Extensive discussions were held with the Pleiadians for the next 3 days. Eisenhower had virtually disappeared from sight, while he and his top aides discussed what their response would be. This is the famous dentist incident. Oh, I met my dentist. I can't take any press. The biggest threat to their decision was the economy. The economists warned that the alien intrusion would put an unknown factor into reality as a whole. Having just recovered from World War II and the Great Depression, the economy was a major consideration, and now having alien technology show up would basically put the United States economy in a tailspin, in all probability. Additionally, there would have been strong negative reaction from the religions. Eisenhower warned that this would cause panic on Earth. Quote, "We're not ready for that yet," the president pleaded. The Pleiadians understood and left the bewildered president and his entourage standing, awestruck and silent on the tarmac. Ever since President Kennedy, there has been very little interaction with aliens on a presidential level. Now, that was written in 2009. There's a big Trump piece, of course, with John Trump, and there's this unusual sort of alien push that's going on now. But I do think that Trump's intrusion into the UFO file was the Space Force. So I think that that gives us a piece on Eisenhower. And the Pulsatis I'll read after your next question.
So Giza Death Star Community says, or Eisenhower was in San Carlos de Bariloche.
Oh my goodness. That one we have to talk about for sure. And that's pretty interesting too, because, very often there's a lot of crossover, as you can find in Dr. Farrell's book, Roswell and the Reich, because you're dealing with an alien incident on one hand, and then on the other hand, you're dealing again with this national security state Nazi interaction. Which is it? It's not easy to tell.
Okay, this is so fantastic. Moments Divine says we need an ET Awareness Month. I so agree. This is a fantastic idea.
Wow. It's a great idea. Well, this is the thing. They're trying to, really push on us the whole false CIA UFO threat thing. They got into trouble with it, and I think we got them at least thinking, there's going to be a lot of opposition to this. And so they came back with a really weird, we're scientific about aliens, and we love science. And they were pushing Avi Loeb, who was like, Oumuamua was a big spaceship, but it's like a huge meteorite just going through town.
I don't know. I'm sort of leaning into the Oumuamua thing.
He's pretty interesting. Loeb is maybe like 5 minutes from here. And what I find fascinating about him is he's the one who's been allowed to go outside the box and be like, let's talk about aliens. And you have to wonder, we should look at Loeb's background, not to see him as a sinister figure or anything like that, but what is it about Loeb that would make him qualify, for the kind of Mr. Global to select him and say, you talk from your Harvard astronomy viewpoint about aliens coming here through Oumuamua. It's pretty unusual. 5 years ago, in fact, it happened with John Mack. They try to get rid of his standing there at Harvard because he was dealing with the alien abduction phenomena. So let's compare the two. They select Loeb to talk about aliens. They block Mack. and try to remove his tenure and everything else. So which one's telling the truth? Obviously, there's something in Mac's work that they don't want getting out, but they want to promote this other alien idea. That's the way we need to kind of sort through these, I believe. Yes.
Well, Greta can't get any traction, right?
Greta Thunberg?
She's just despicable and so unlikable. And, we know they have their agenda. They're already pivoting to climate change.
Insult this incredible climate artist.
So, I mean, it is. Do you think they have this in their back pocket, sort of, or an ace up their sleeve, that they will have the aliens come out and say, this is necessary for your survival. We're here for your own good. And you have to do, X, Y, Z in order to save the planet, save yourselves.
Well, this is the interesting thing. They've definitely, if you go back to 2017, 2018, and go through a series of articles, Newsweek, The Atlantic, and others, every time they were talking about climate change, they'd throw in a little side thing about aliens. And they were like, that should make us want to think about whether aliens are here. It was or how would aliens feel about saving the planet? It was so weird the way that they were doing it. Now, there's one or two reasons for that. Let's think about this for a minute. Let's suppose an off-world culture was observing us and realized we were going off the rails with our nuclear tests and the things that we've done to destroy the atmosphere, and now the incredible industrialization, pharmaceutical zombifying. And they wanted to get that civilization back on track. Very much how we talk about the mystery schools wanting to move the culture in the right direction. Then what? How would they do it? Well, you have that, and then you have the narrative of the Space Brothers. And you have the kind of CIA narrative of you have a threat. Now, the CIA can move whatever they think will work. They can move it into any of those perspectives. It can be a threat. It can be a savior, mean. It can be, we're here to save you from an incoming asteroid. We've seen all these things floated. This group at the top is not sure which one to use. And then besides all that junk, there's the actual thing that's happening, right? There's actual beings from off-world civilizations observing our Earth, and they are interacting with people here. So then what? How do you get the truth of these matters without the meme and the narrative being thrown on top by the likes of Elizondo or people like that who want to militarize your consciousness so that when you think about aliens, you think about fighting them, or you think about, can we launch a nuke at them or something? That's the illness, right? So here we are as a culture advancing, moving into this idea as we have been in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, a great realization about UFO disclosure, about aliens. Even the silly stuff like the alien autopsy still had some of that. Yeah, what do you got?
No, I was just thinking about the alien autopsy.
They turned it into a musical eventually. That's how bad it got.
Are you kidding?
No. That guy, the guy who sold it in the first place.
Is that on YouTube?
It's just the kind of thing you check out. What's interesting to me, though, if you just look at that period, you can see that the wall of secrecy is very thin in the late 90s. And then it goes back up dramatically during the 9/11 periods. And I think that this incident, the Transcenders prediction for October 13th and this massive sighting over New York City, was a change point that was missed. And as I said, even the UFO researchers missed it. So it was something crucial, and then the people involved died quickly afterwards, either of natural causes or they were helped along. And so you had a void there. And that's why I think this story is important for us to revisit, because there were people in New York who saw this. I have heard from them. I'd like to hear from more. What was the nature of that event? And it seems to me the fact that it was predicted through Stan and the Transcenders, and after having spent some time with the Transcenders, I believe that this incident was the genuine article and was not a kind of War of the Worlds test or the phony tic-tac thing that the CIA would pull. So, that's, I think, where it leaves us. Yes.
Kontiki Man says on Coast to Coast, Fulham said they were decloaking as they were always around.
Oh, really interesting. Yeah. He does have an appearance on Coast.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I felt he was so vital. Coast to Coast is so late, and he was
Yeah.
up and he was just, charged up.
Oh, he sounds great.
And,
Yeah.
6 weeks before he died is just crazy.
If you see the Randy Kitcher interview, and I recommend it, I think if you search, and Kitcher, I'm going to spell this out. Randy is the first name. Kitcher is Kitchur. And as I said, I've interviewed Randy. He's a wealth of information on the UFO topic up there in Canada. And I believe he's the one who is publishing Stan's book. And the book is Challenges of Change, Stanley A. Fulham. I think this is the 3rd edition. That's the one that I got. And, you can look around, like there are some dates in there where it's like, there might be Earth changes in 2015 or whatever it happened to be that seem like misfires or whatever. But what I've learned is that there's kind of a core of information in this book and in the Transcender material. There was a time when the Transcender CDs were available. I certainly have them, and I have my recorded conversations with them. But I don't know if those are as easy to get. But the Transcenders are certainly unusual, and they seem to very much predict the zeitgeist that we're in. One, they talked about the damage to our atmosphere causing a situation where the aliens would actually be visible in our atmosphere, and this was a problem. And this is part of why they were appearing at the time. But that the extent of damage to our atmosphere was actually being hidden by the government at that time. That's very interesting to me.
Is it possible that the damage to our environment, our air supply is partly because of what they've been spraying for years, and that's not necessarily natural?
Chemtrails.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, this is why Elena Freeland's work is so vital. Here's the thing about Alana's work. She's been somebody who's on top of that, going back, her first complete book, I think 2014. And there are all kinds of, researches around chemtrails and such. But the combination of creating a global grid using a space fence, that wasn't really out there. And this is why I think her work is so valuable. And my recent interview with her, I highly recommend. Yes.
Okay, so 1 second.
Oh, take your time.
Christopher Bradley, how does one distinguish an extraterrestrial from an angel or demon, or is there a difference? How would one know? How does one discern what one is dealing with?
Yeah, I mean, that comes up anytime you're dealing with any kind of spiritual ceremony as well. I think that there's a big reflex action against aliens that, it's somehow related to, an evil thing or a fallen angel thing. I think they're just peers. I think that's how we need to look at them. And this is part of the great awakening of humanity, recognizing other peers. I don't see them as, they might be superior, of course, technologically, but I don't see them as superior to us as beings at all. So I think that that's the way I would look at it. Now, there's some really remarkable stories, and it's interesting we have Joseph in the chat, because if you think of that whole narrative that happens in the Bible in unusual stories like the Tower of Babel, they basically have a situation where they see us developing somewhere. They see us maybe misusing our technology, and they decide we're going to take them down and make them speak not one language, but many languages. So we'll confound their language. This is very crucial. And one of the great things that Joseph has done is made that Tower of Babel moment phrase, because this might be something that we're coming into as well. And maybe that's something I'll explore on the next interview with Joseph when we get him back on soon. Because there's something unusual in that Tower of Babel story. and you wish there was more of it in there, because what it says that's so strange for the Bible is the gods reasoned among themselves that mankind soon will be able to do whatever they want. We better do something about this. So that's a different group that's overseeing things, and that, that they're referred to sometimes in Enoch material as the Watchers, this group that's watching over our development. And they're obviously they're playing, they're not God, but they're in that kind of overlooking, overseer role of things that are happening on Earth. So obviously there are levels here to what's happening in the development and the evolution of humanity. I can only imagine what they think of, nonsense like mandates and pharma takeovers and things like that. They must think, as we do, it's just one of the lowest moments. And as a result of that, I think that this new world order will fail. However, I think it's obvious that it's an incredible clash, just like, clashing with the Nazis, or clashing, the Russians clashing with the Nazis, or clashing with the Japanese. There's a way. It's like we need to throw off the Davos crowd and the deep state, and how that's going to go is anybody's guess at this point. But certainly we're starting to feel that resistance building up, and we're all still here to talk about it. So far so good. Yes.
Okay, so a cult fan said, I'm not sure if it's been mentioned, but 10/13 is the famous day that Jacques de Molay was burned at the stake, and also the birthday of X-Files creator Chris Carter, and of course Fox Mulder.
Is it really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's interesting. That's pretty good. That's pretty good on the straight up trivia side. That's a big winner. Here's something about this group, the Pulsatis, which I find interesting. So the Transcenders talk about this group, which became so over the top that they completely decimated their planet technologically, and that there's a great lesson in that. By the way, the Pulsati and their appearance sounds very much like the Hopkinsville, Kentucky aliens who came and messed with that family, and they have the kind of unusual appearance of the big ears, and they almost look like goblins or something. And that's part of the effect of their strange environment, according to the Transcenders. Now, here are the Transcenders talking. Take the Pulsatis, for example, who followed very similar lines to that of Earth, almost identical in many ways. They also lived in an oxygen atmosphere very similar to Earth. They became so polluted, and indeed almost all of their life forms became non-existent. And some, in order to maintain them, were taken to other planets, including Earth. They're beginning to reharvest them and place them back into their home world, now that they got rid of most of their pollution and rebalanced their environment. So they learned a devastating lesson, but they did learn to preserve and then reseed their reality. This is interesting to me. There was a huge seed kind of Noah's Ark project that was going forward in Norway, and it had been going on since the late 60s, in fact. And a story came out just around the same time that Bill Gates was buying up all this farmland in America, that he had somehow bought what I thought was a nonprofit seed harvesting facility. And somehow Gates has his hands on that as well. So these people don't want us to have the ability, if they mess things up, to come back strong on our own. They seem to want to preserve every option to themselves. And I think this is the great mask that's coming off, which is they've been hiding these realities from the average citizens for many, many years. And here we are. Yes.
Frank Monday. Please ask DJ about the Von Braun and Disney connection. How do Freemasons, Nazis, and NASA fit in with the MK Ultra and Disney?
I'm going to save that one for when we have Joseph Farrell on, because there's a lot of corners in all of that are absolutely crucial. But I'll say this. I was watching an interview with former President Nixon, And he started talking about von Braun and how we needed those Nazis after the war. And I thought, this is interesting, and I've never seen it that's so open. But what's interesting is how key Nixon was in with Operation Paperclip, and how those scientists and the transfer of that technology over to America. Nixon is very involved there in that period of the late 40s for it. And so later, his knowledge of the UFO file and what they call UFO Blue Book, which is the real Project Blue Book, not the phony thing that we got for the public, all the way up to, all the incidents involving Nixon and Jackie Gleason showing him dead aliens and things like that, and how he was sort of showing off to Gleason, but Gleason got this story out. Something kind of remarkable about Nixon and the UFO file as we brought forward in the time capsule stories. So yeah, that one, wow.
Danielle Jorgensen is asking about CERN changing timelines to either draw certain ETs or repel. Many people feel like the timeline was changed under Shrubby Jr.
Look, they've definitely changed realities. They've changed the course that we were on. I mentioned President Kennedy earlier. What kind of a world was he building? So they've interfered. We got Vietnam instead, right? So they destroyed that path going forward. And then, our idealism as a race keeps rising to try to meet the challenge. And we've got a backwards political corporate system. And as a result of that, the stark contrast between what people want and this kind of horrible reality that's been devised for them has just made that establishment go, look, we're going to kill you. We're going to take your job away if you don't do what we say and take the kind of toxic sludge that we want to give you. Jen Psaki is a real good, all of her decades with the Pentagon are really showing up here. There's a kind of psychosis deep in Jen Psaki. There's a psychosis in Pelosi.
You think?
So, this is where we find ourselves in this schizophrenic situation where we have the public consciousness rising and you have a backward leadership. So the disrespect cycle between the two is so far apart. It's how do you get that back together? I mean, is really the best thing America can do Stepford Biden? Think about it. Really? He can't even think straight. He should be in an elder facility because he has some level of dementia, unfortunately, but he shouldn't be running the country. And he didn't.
Many would say he's not running the country.
Yeah, exactly. The committee is running the country. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. Whew, we are deep into X-111, and this is the 2022 UFO warning. The missing contact case, Stan Fulham and the Transcenders, an unusual Pleiadians over New York City of this massive display, October 13th, 2010. It really happened. I got a press release for it before it happened, and then it happened. So it's been lingering back there, and so much of that was associated with when I was starting to do Dark Journalist that it's interesting because I think of it, whenever I think of that early period of disclosure in this era, I think that was an attempt, non-CIA attempt, a real attempt. And that's just something that got terribly missed. So I'm glad we were able to go over it at length tonight. There's so much more to go into. We might have to do another show on it, but, we're starting to get that one back on the table. Ask all of your friendly neighborhood UFO researchers, the experts, why are they running around after? They have this new thing, I kid you not. What do they call this thing? I think they call it Daffy Duck. Is that what it's? The Daffy Duck UAP. Is that what it is? Someone out there knows what this is. This is a new one. I kid you not. They keep coming up with these things. It's like, here's the Tic Tac. Here's the beach ball, and now the new one I think is Daffy Duck. It's got like a.
It's supposed
beak.
to like hip branding. It's
Yeah.
weird.
Right. It's like this weird.
Oh, this will catch on.
Right. It's the Corbell like swearing every 2 seconds. Right. This guy is some weird filmmaker now, and whenever they want an
Rubber
expert,
duck is what
rubber duck.
Rubber ducky.
Yes, rubber ducky. This is where they're going, right? I mean,
oh god, everything is just so insulting to our intelligence,
Think
our
about it.
maturity as adults.
think
This
of
is
how
just awful.
special that realization about aliens and things like the first time you discovered it, right? That first time you knew there was something extra going on, right? I read John Keel and works like that when I was 7 or 8 years old. And so I remember the mystery of the whole thing. And when I see this junk laid on top of it, the Elizondos and all that stuff, I don't like to pay attention to the junk, but that's where the condition of the culture is. And so we need to part with that whole approach and just be like, there's CIA disclosure over here on the UFO thing, and then over here is UFO file X research, and we move right along. That's the way to handle it. Yes.
Tomotak Ofirgal says the apparition of Our Lady of Fatima was also on October 13th, 1917.
Oh, excellent.
I would love to do
point.
a show on that.
Well, look, that's beyond, that is, people actually saw the sun, these incredible things show up in the sun, and time stopped. So many of those people, I think, had such a religious experience and a spiritual awakening that there are those things that happen. We don't know, but it's some combination of the people, the time, and the incident is meant to spread out and bring us all that wonder and mystery. Yes.
Thank Q says, who identified the visitors above New York City on 10/13/2010 as Pleiadians?
That's the Transcenders, and I talked to them extensively about it. I asked them a series of questions, and what they explained was they're going to be working on the atmosphere, so people are going to see them. By the way, the Transcenders said that the U.S. has shoot-down orders on Pleiadian ships, that they have military harassment of Pleiadian ships, but that they interact with the Greys. Now, we don't know if that's true or not. I'm just saying that this is something. What I want to say about the Transcenders and the whole thing about Stan Fulham is, look, Fulham had the NORAD background. He had a friend named Dave, who was in the Air Force, who gave him UFO reports, and he interacted with him. He's a big figure for Stan whenever he talks in these interviews. He's always referencing Dave, which is a pseudonym. I think the actual guy's name is Dale, interestingly enough. But oddly enough, what happens is when you look at it, Fulham had the background. He understood he had gone as far as he could on the UFO side, and he went into the spiritual realm to get more information. This is basically what he brought forward. And out of that came the Transcenders and then this prediction for the Pleiadians over New York City. And in those interviews in the summer of 2010, you will see Stan talking about that. And I also can tell you, I got a press release that this was going to happen. So therefore, this incident, which I think is valuable and really important, however you want to size it up, was so overlooked that when I talked to people like, I think in 2013, I talked to Richard Dolan about it. He didn't know anything about it. And he lives in New York. So there's some weird thing. There's like some blackout over this case. And there's also a kind of a haze, I feel, when some of those researchers went to look at it. And when I presented other people with it, it seemed like they were in they could not get their attention on it. It was very strange. So let's see if we are collectively bringing this home here tonight. We're igniting the question of what happened over New York City on October 13th, 2010. And the book gives us that indication. I followed up on the book with ours with the Transcenders, and certainly the Pleiadians came up a lot. It's quite fascinating. As I said, their work around the Pleiadians is pretty comprehensive. And, I can't say for sure whether it is Pleiadians that are doing this. But I have to say, going on kind of the level of where we get psychic information, whether it's in theosophy, anthroposophy, in the Casey work, in Gurdjieff's work even, there's a level of psychic information that will lead us to a breakthrough and does go beyond all the filters and all the arguments online and things like that. So therefore, I think it's valuable. That's why the work of Gigi Young is so important in this period, and that's why Gigi's work needs to come, and it's really coming up to this whole other level, but we need, it needs even greater exposure, because I think that she's doing something in that role, which, she's really filling a void, because there's not a lot in that space right now, in that frequency, who can bring that larger reality. I will say this, that I think even 20 years ago, even though they've opened up the question of UFOs, and you can talk about UFOs now, aren't you happy? But I actually think the spiritual overtones of the conversations about aliens and the deeper aspects, even 2 decades ago, were better. They were stronger. People had a better grasp of it. I don't know if the culture had been prepared that way, but something took it off to the side. We got a lot of junk. We got a lot of Corey Good and Gaia junk. And then I think that was a real low point. And then I think the TTSA thing was like a weird way for the CIA to apprehend the whole field. And so that's where I think we are now. And we need to split off, I think, that piece and go in a totally different direction. Yes.
Bobo the Clown. Could it be possible that negative aliens have a part in the pandemic we're all suffering?
It's possible. Unfortunately, I think it could be completely human engineered because of the kind of greed and psychosis of the political class and the pharmaceutical giants and the rest of it. But I think what you have to look at is it has to be considered that there's a hostile alien group that works with this government. We have to at least consider that for sure. And I will look to information like the Transcenders, and I'll also look to anecdotal information from retired military people and things like that to find some kind of basis for an answer on questions like that. I think it's a really worthy question. And there have been things that have slipped out about us working with negative ETs. And I think it could very well be.
Especially with things that are coming out and have come out this week on Stu Peters.
Yeah, well, there's a few shows that are bringing things out like that. And it's becoming like scientifically, people are starting to wonder, like, what kind of a thing are you encasing us in? What's happening here? What are you trying to do? And it's getting horrifying because people are looking at their kids and they're like, oh, it's one thing for me to consider what they're trying to do to me, but they're trying to do it to my children. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I mean, that's where the rubber meets the road on so many things. So therefore, I feel that overreach is so dramatic through the censorship. And there was a dramatic overreach that took place, and it was the New York Post story about Hunter Biden, the glorious artist. But they had his laptop and they had him negotiating with Chinese companies. It was going to be very embarrassing to Joe Biden, and everyone killed it. And Twitter would not let it be shared. And then simultaneously, they shut off the tweeting ability of the president of the United States. That was a red line that society should put back. and didn't. So it's a problem now. Now we're out of bounds. So when you're out of bounds, all kinds of weird things can happen. But, you know, any good historian will tell you that when Hitler marched on the Rhine, you know, this was a point, an early point, and I'm going to guess the year here is 35, that they could have stopped him there. They could have stopped him from when he annexed Austria, for example. There were a number of different occasions. And oddly enough, JFK wrote a book directly out of college called Why England Slept. And it was, how did we get into World War II anyway? Why wasn't England awake to this threat that was building over here? But this is the nature of the thing. So we have to figure out in that progression of things that Hitler did, you know, the Sudetenland and all the rest of it. Where are we now? You know, just before they roll into Poland and like, hey, World War II is on you, whether you want it or not. So we're right in that flux of things. But at each of those different stops, they didn't stop the aggression. And, you know, the governments became appeasers. And what happened was, as appeasers, the fascists rolled in. So we know one thing as a lesson from history: we can't be appeasers. And that's for sure. Okay.
Yeah, I really like this idea that out of bounds, right? What happened was it's that whole frog in the pot thing, and it's gotten to this point. We know that we've been living under a certain amount, like things have been unjust for a long time, and everybody's been enriching themselves in the revolving door between agencies and, you know, corporations and all this stuff.
Exactly.
We know we've been putting up with this, right? And we've been putting up with taxes, blah, blah, blah. It got to a point now where there's just no trust anymore between us and the media, between us and our government. There's no taxation with representation anymore, right? It's just, we are playing, all the rules have been broken. There's no game anymore, right?
Right.
It is anarchy, actually.
Well, there's a facsimile of a game. This is the weird thing. They're trying to put this layer on top that, like, hey, you can kind of go along the way you used to be if you just accept all this weird stuff we want to do to you. You know, so if we can make you an automaton or somehow connect you with the Internet of Things, you just play along with us. So that plays against the incredible opportunity that we have. There's incredible wealth. There's incredible cooperation. There's incredible advancement that people have made. There's a lot of spiritual realizations. You know, so this is the weird juxtaposition between, I think, things happening on the ground and then the psychotic leadership that is lording these things over us. So we find ourselves in a weird situation. And where do you go from there? That's really where it's at, where now we can see it. And look, what you were saying is absolutely right, because the average person was willing to let, like, you know, Gates act like a scumbag and become a billionaire. They're willing, they expect that mega class, you know, the rich class, the billionaire class, to act with the lowest kind of human thought and the lowest kind of human dignity. But this thing, you know, if suddenly now they're reaching in and saying, I want to harvest you and your kids direct, and I'm going to, you know, it's not subtle. And if you go against us, we're going to call you domestic terrorists. And by the way, you don't have a gender anymore. You know, I mean, they've just gone off the rails. So the question is they're going off the rails now. Is that the setup for us to realize our own best potential? And one of the things that Fitz has pointed out is we might have to be ready to take over after, you know, like, you ever see those films of Berlin after the war was just decimated and there are people looking around, you know, to see if they can find cabbage or something to eat. You know, we might find ourselves in a position where after their psychosis burns things down, we have to swoop in there and build up with something new. So what are we developing in the meantime while we're under attack? Because there's no question that we're under attack. So this becomes maybe the central question for us to answer. Where do we spend our effort? One thing that I want to point out is that we have to invest in our army. And our army are the people who are telling the truth in the media sphere. So whether it's, the work of RFK Jr., Catherine Austin Fitz, Gigi Young, Dr. Farrell, the work we're doing on this show, that's our army for opening this up. Pierre Corey, Malone, Big Tree. These are the people that are standing up and taking it. So, and it takes a lot of courage to do what they do. I know that they scared Mercola so much, Dr. Mercola, not Angela Merkel, that he took all of his stuff offline for a while. I thought that was interesting. They ran around after him, and CNN was trying to really make him look bad. And I think he got so freaked out that they were chasing him with a camera that he was like, what am I going to do here? I'm taking my stuff offline. I'm warning everybody, you have 72 hours to download it yourself. And I understand that, but I actually think it's the wrong thing to do. And, everyone has to reason from their own particular space. It's just the opposite, in fact. What you do is you double down, put up 3 more sites of your stuff. It's on, baby. I always said it was better out in the open. This is something I pointed out with Bill Gates and that whole weird situation. They were trying to make him, come out and be a doctor, which is ridiculous because he didn't even finish college. But what's interesting about it is I kind of almost preferred if they said, look, we have killer robots. We have the ability to send out, mind control waves. And do you think that you can fight us? Do you think I'd rather have them just come out and say that, and then we can divide, things up among ourselves and say, can we take on this thing? But so I like the fight kind of more out in the open. I think it's a better place. But I think they're trying to trick us into a fight. And I think that we have so many tools available to us legislatively, people pressure wise. There's so much pressure to apply if we just wake up others more around the things that are being done. Yes.
By the way, I saw a video just tonight before going live of the dogs, the robot dogs that now are armed.
Now they're armed. Yeah.
It's terrifying. And they have quite a few of them. So,
well, I'll tell you something that came up, and this was a couple of years ago, and they were saying they had all these weird rules about dogs all of a sudden. And pets were really under attack. And there were strange stories last year about them killing 1 million minks. You remember that?
Yeah.
But I'll stick to the pet part. I learned that with thermography and the kind of the way that they can envision things based on a heat signature, that animals really mess them up. So like, your cat, your dog, it messes up their ability to observe you if they want to in that thermographic way. So I think that this kind of war on pets needs to be called out as well, because it keeps coming up. There's always something about, they're like, is your cat carrying COVID?
Well, and all those dogs that they killed in Australia.
Yes, that was also a freak show.
Horrifying.
So they didn't want people to go to this annual show to, kind of look at these incredible breed dogs. And so what did they do? They didn't ship the dogs anywhere or whatever. They massacred the dogs, which is, the mentality is beyond sick for doing that. But we see a lot of that with Australia. They've tried to target Australia, and it's a credit to the people in Australia. They will throw this off. But they're going through an incredible trial with this, and we've seen the real kind of Stasi tactics of showing up and saying, did you post this on social media, or you're coming with us? So, we're really, I think Australia is an international crisis and needs to be brought forward as an international crisis before all the nations of the world for what's happening there. And the United States is, if anything, is trying to emulate that. It's not trying to stop it. So there are groups, and I have to point this out. I'm not, I like to stay independent politically. Once in a while you have no choice. I'll point this out. The leftist side of this equation, the Democrats, are all voting for mandates. They're voting for lockdowns. So whatever it is to be a Democrat has changed. They now, believe in fascism, unfortunately. Previously, we had repressive Republicans and things like that, and you have the Republican leadership, people like McConnell and stuff. But the majority of the Republicans are pressing against the mandates. They're pressing for the constitutional base because they're trying to satisfy their base. But you know what? Their base is what counts because we live in a country that's governed by the Constitution. So we're in a weird situation where it's becoming very clear that people who either believe in libertarian values or from a Republican point of view believe in having access to guns if the government turns on you. I mean, that's the problem in Australia. They made everyone turn in their guns. I think it was 2014. Well, they have no ability to resist the tyrannical government. That's a problem. That's why the Second Amendment is important here. And, they occasionally people will point to abuse of the Second Amendment. Well, some, maniac shot up a grocery store. Well, that's terrible. But you're not going to take away the ability for people to have guns to protect themselves because of that, So this is absolutely the crucial aspects of the whole thing. So I have to say, and it's very disappointing, that the Democrats are the people in the polls who are pushing the tyranny. And it's unmistakable. So that's not trying to favor political parties or whatever. I don't care. Green Party, Libertarian, Republican, Democrat, whatever it happens to be, you have to follow the Constitution. And the Constitution does not allow for random mandates from, brain impaired leaders. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. We're here. It's X Series 111. We have gone deep on the Transcenders, Stan Fulham, and the general kind of political milieu that we're in right now. I want to remind you to go to darkjournalist.com, sign up for our newsletter. It's a free newsletter. It keeps you, with all the massive censorship that we're seeing, we need our own pipeline of interaction there. While you're there at the site, feel free to subscribe and get behind the work that we're doing on this program for you, as so many of you have. I appreciate it. And we'll take 2 more questions, Miss Olivia. And
do you want to give out the actual address?
Oh, that's a good idea. A lot of people have said to me that they wanted to join Dark Journalist, but wanted to pay by check instead of PayPal, which is totally fine. You can send it to Dark Journalist, 1770 Massachusetts Avenue, number 238, Cambridge, Mass. 02140. And again, we appreciate all your support during this period. I think we're going to have some shows coming up about things that we can do to prepare to go into this winter. And we'll try to do it from a wide range, as well as just the normal X shows that we do anyway. But that's something that's in the mix, and some incredible, some really remarkable interviews coming up for you here in October and November. Yes, Ms.
Eric Kraft, GG, do you think a fake alien invasion will utilize reversed alien technology?
Yes, absolutely. I think they have in tests. When they bring forward these test pilots and they have them talking, it's really interesting because I feel like they're genuine, of course. And we've had Navy pilots viewing UFOs for years. This is nothing new. That's where you're going to see them, in fact, because there are a lot of underwater bases. And every once in a while, they change that UFO narrative to a USO narrative. Have you noticed that with the Elizondo people? They're like, maybe they're coming from under the water, Don't tell me that's not hot zone related and that it isn't about some of these ancient ruins down there. But I think, again, when we're looking at these things, it's the ability to call them out. Yes.
I just want to say, Alien Resistance Group says the social contract has been broken. How will we rebuild it? And feeling better naturally says parallel communities. This is a big thing that's coming up. It's almost like a breakaway civilization. We have to build a parallel community, a parallel society. A lot of people are getting away from the cities. They're buying land. They're setting up communes. They're getting out of debt. They're buying guns. They're buying seeds.
Well, I think that those things are good. I think we are going to do shows on them. I don't think one size fits all. Some people can't leave the cities. And, but I say it's, it all is very individual. You have to go where your finances go the furthest. So, and you need to divorce yourself from as much government interaction as possible. So people who, I think this is a big piece of it, which is if you have the ability to work and not have an unemployment check, go for it, because you don't want that connection. The less connections you have with that government, the better. But every situation is individual, and you're going to need to solve it. What I will say is it is, of course, a fantastic time, especially as a hedge against the inflation. Inflation is 5.4%. They're not broadcasting the failures of this administration strongly enough. It's absurd how bad the numbers are. These are the numbers that are like 1979 Jimmy Carter numbers, and the disasters I think that Biden has had in Afghanistan, and just his general horrid mandates thing, getting people thrown out of jobs and saying that's a good thing because, we have the rate at 99% now. Yeah, well, you just threw all those people out of work. There's a kind of an illness here, and I think that has to crash and rupture before it can heal itself. It's just where that part's heading. But I do think that we have a really loud voice in America, and I feel America can be the leader of the world in this. If we throw it off in our own country, it'll be a model for the world. And that's the crucial thing. We need to throw out the Biden administration. We need to throw out that whole group of leadership. And we need to just come back to constitutional principles for running the country. It's very obvious. And we have the numbers, What is the Doors song? They got the guns, but we got the numbers, mm-hmm. Right? So we definitely have the numbers. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. Okay, 2 more questions, and then I have a quote, and then we're out of here.
Craftomatic. Has DJ seen that Homeland Security is to set off non-toxic gas in New York City subways in bioattack readiness test October 18th through the 29th? Was supposedly also done in 2016. Is it really non-toxic? I
have seen them do this before. They did it here in the Boston subway system as well. It's a really weird test. They're like, hey, what if a terrorist does this? We need to know how to combat it. But how'd you like to be on one of those trains while they're testing this? Do you really trust that they're doing it with, something that's completely trustworthy and safe? I don't know. But that is definitely something to keep an eye on. Really weird if you think about it.
They did that in Harvard Square in 2016, I think.
Yeah, they were doing it for the subway, and mm-hmm. This is, the problem is fundamentally whether it's, they used to have a problem, right, when they used to put excess mercury into everything, and they were like, we don't care if it causes Alzheimer's or whatever. And then they get called out for 20 years and, something finally happens, right? But now they're on a whole different level. They're trying to connect us into an AI system, and they're going into the core of your own electromagnetic field. So we have to look at where they're intruding to. The next step is to intrude into you, right? That's the step that they're at. So, what do you have next? So you have to stop. They have to be stopped there, and there is enough resistance to do it if we can get support behind the right people. That's the way I look at it. I wanted to point this out because I was talking about Pleiadians earlier, and that is the Nebra Sky Disk. Nebra Sky Disk is very unusual because it's so well preserved from this early period. but it's from about 2000 BC, and it shows that Pleiadian group here, the 7 sisters. That Nebra disk, I want to read a couple of things about it. It's a bronze disk and has a blue-green patina, and it's inlaid with gold symbols. These symbols are interpreted generally as the sun or full moon, lunar crescent, and stars, including a cluster of 7 stars that are the Pleiades. 2 golden arcs along the sides, interpreted to mark the angle between the solstices, were added later. A final addition was another arc at the bottom. This disk has been attributed to a site in present-day Germany near Nebra, and it was originally dated by archaeologists to 1600 BC. Researchers initially suggested the disk is an artifact of the Bronze Age, although later dating shows it might be much older. That disk is very interesting because you have to think of the culture that could put that together. But their highlighting of the Pleiades, again, gives me that sense that there's something deep in there about the Pleiades. I'm going to read one more thing about the Pleiades as soon as I take your last question.
I did want to fit this one in. A cult fan. I just want to bring your attention that during this show, a clip of Biden has come out, and he is totally manifesting / channeling Armand. A lot of people are saying that.
Yeah. Well, he's kind of like just the kind of stiff, with nothing.
Well, he's an empty vessel. So
he's an empty vessel, right? He's sort of like he's Stepford Biden is what he is. All right. This, I think, is important, and we'll leave the Transcenders piece for this episode right here, but we will follow up probably with some audio recordings that I'll assemble from my time with them. All right. This, I think, is interesting. They're talking about, do the Pleiadians communicate with politicians or the military? Here's the answer on the Transcender side. Yes, with top military people and these people discussed with scientists, geologists to find out whether that was a reality or a potential, and then finding out that there was a probability of a huge impact on the Earth depending on where, when, of testing locations. This is about nuclear testing and the Pleiadians trying to warn us off from doing this. The Transcenders. Information on these nuclear tests were filtered down to the scientific world. A number of geologists, through their associations, warned the world of the risks in exploding a hydrogen bomb. We believe that mankind will come to their senses and not use these apocalyptic weapons. We have great faith in mankind, but there are no absolutes in the universe. The development of the hydrogen bomb on Earth was a matter of grave concern to the Council. These are the 8 alien groups. The Greys are in there. They call them the Botes. The Pleiadians are in there. This Pulsati group is in there. The Orions are in there. So apparently the hydrogen bomb became a grave concern for them. To the Council. And there was a great deal of political intervention at that time, coupled with an accelerated UFO activity, not only from the Council, but from other planetary systems, who came to witness the probability of this primitive society blowing up their planet into dust at the height of the Cold War. That was the first time that the Botes, the Greys, who had actually been in contact with the U.S. government for many years, stepped forward and said, this is not a good idea. As you know, the Botes have no particular emotion. They are not noted for compassion or their connectiveness. They are more forward and said, enough is enough. That is not your path to travel. You are headed towards total destruction of your planet. That's the Greys saying that. The Pleiadians had planted individuals in positions throughout the world to alter their path to destruction. There are now 3 hydrogen bombs. China has joined the club with the United States and Russia. So serious was the situation that the Council considered an invasion of Earth at that time to interfere with free will, but it was considered a last desperate probability. So that I find very interesting, and just this idea that back there are these groups like the Pleiadians planting people in government, planting people in different positions, moving the culture forward. We've spoken about this in relation to the mystery schools. They also have an effect like that. At the same time, some of the other groups, maybe like the Greys and stuff, are opportunistic because they want to do things like abductions. And so they're willing to trade off to this government certain types of technology in order to be able to do that without being impeded. These are the types of realizations I think we can get from the Transcender material around the alien groups. And so I think it's a worthy effort. And it takes us back directly to the incident that we started with, which is, the incident over New York, October 13th, 2010 happened. And Stan Fulham predicted it openly before it happened, and the Transcenders were giving him that information. That, I think, is something that needs to be front and center on the UFO side of the equation. Forget about Tic Tac and that junk. No CIA junk, no Elizondo. What's really going on? This, I think, can kind of give us that insight. And that's where I think we're going. Yes.
Okay, so is this the last question?
Yes.
Alan Carna, so what is the 2022 UFO warning then?
It is. In the book, the Transcenders say that the industrial pollution mixed with the nuclear testing will bring us at that current rate of acceleration. And the book was done in 2009. It was going to bring us to a point in 2022 of basically an environmental disaster that we couldn't recover from. So leading up to it, they mention all of these respiratory problems that we'd be having. And I feel like some of the activity with the COVID thing that they have been doing has been to mask some of this, so that something else is going on and they want this out there so they can say, oh, you have to surrender all your liberties for this. And they're not telling us about the large scale part. And the reason I really connect these two things together, and I think it's a good rational conclusion, is because during the lockdowns, they kept replaying the alien stupid Tic Tac stuff from 2017. And they were pushing that, and the Pentagon was suddenly like, oh yeah, those videos from 2 years ago, they were legit and all that. Suddenly, they were mixing up right in the middle of all this, a huge UAP push, a new UFO wave, directly as we were in lockdown. So somehow the two things are related. I feel like the two ops are on. And like I said, if you think the COVID op has been nasty, just wait till the UFO threat op kicks in. I mean, that's going to be off the Richter scale for that. But I do feel like throughout this book is incredibly predictive information of challenges of change. Let's see, respiratory issues. Okay, this is mentioned actually on page 203. So what they're saying is critical mass is 22% for a certain type of destruction of this atmosphere of CO2 in the atmosphere. Mankind will not survive within that critical amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, but there are serious health impacts long before that critical point is reached. In fact, as you are experiencing now in some parts of the world. So that ability to reverse the trend. So what would happen is that mankind would have all kinds of respiratory difficulties. Just look at the massive increase in allergies. In the last 50 years, there has been 800% increase in respiratory diseases and conditions alone. Again, this is 2009. So that may give you a sense of where your environment is taking you. Imagine the atmospheric environment of China's worst polluted city. Increase that several times. That may give you some idea of the situation the world will be facing in the next several years. You are breathing in oxygen and exhaling carbon dioxide. Your blood system, your body, feeds off the oxygen, metabolizes it, and therefore that oxygen that you breathe in is eliminated and becomes less and less and less. This is nothing unique about mankind's experience. That tragically has been the experience of countless thousands of other alien civilizations. You are not the worst by any means. The environmental, your pollution will increase as the world gears up to meet the insatiable demand for mankind's desire for more material goods. And as the industrial emissions expands, it reduces proportionately the time mankind has with the destruction of your atmosphere. So what they're saying here is that, you know, they've created a situation on the leadership side by completely destroying the environment and by the industrialization and by the nuclear testing and the satellites and the whole bit, you know, all that thing that they're doing to mine gas out of the earth at this level. So that leadership is trying to turn that environmental disaster on the citizenship and say you need, you know, to pay a carbon tax and all that junk. It's completely ridiculous because it's the corporations that made billions. It made these space billionaires and all the rest of it. Those are the people, those are the companies, the corporations that should be cleaning up the environment. I agree that the environment should be clean. What they're trying to do is turn that reality and say, like, well, you know, it's your fault, but in fact, it's the corporations that have made that money, and it's an absolute duty for them to step forward and fix the things that they've profited from.
Right, if they really cared, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
They're weaponizing the situation against us, against the little people, and they're also creating all these investment vehicles. Like, I don't understand all this stuff, so that they can just get richer from this whole. I mean, it's obscene.
There's no question about it. And what I would say too, look, that has to be the movement. Don't let them get away with saying, "Oh, you know what? We're gonna clean up this atmosphere off your back." You know, they have to be the ones to pay for it. I mean, that's how the alternative side can get behind environmental issues, because environmental, you know, the idea that the environment is being destroyed by corporations should be obvious. And the fact that they're using it against the population that's buying the goods is ridiculous, right? Because they're the ones who were in a big rush to make the profit, and they're the ones who've created the issue. So there's a massive issue here. And what the Transcenders are saying is, you know, if we don't break through that illusion that's going on about it, we're going to be living in this situation. And the first thing he pointed to was respiratory issues, and he referred to China and masks and all the rest of it. That was 2009. They said, when would the critical mass occur? And he said, 2022. This is the era that we're in. So they definitely have played the COVID side out. Somehow it plays into this. They knew it was coming. And then we know that they've also played the UFO threat piece here. So we're looking at something. If we can get a handle through this kind of deep information of transcender-like material, we might be able to bring it about. Let's say we're using deep psychic information on one hand, and then really core analysis on the other. Nothing beats that combination. So these are the types of things that I think are sitting there. And in particular, that early contact case with 2010, really, the Pleiadians hovering over the city. This is the story. It's worthy of being followed up. It's a key disclosure story, much more important than the Tic Tac, in my opinion. And with that, Miss Olivia, you get the last question.
I just think the most positive way to look at all of this, because we know that the USA is having its Pluto return astrologically, and sort of that there's no fighting. I know all about a Pluto return personally. So that is like the Tower card in the tarot. Everything that is not serving God, the higher forces, basically gets washed away and it gets rebuilt. So, and we as citizens have really been allowing them to abuse us and abuse the planet, right? Our country.
Yes.
So with corporations. For a long time, we have not done our duty as citizens, and we haven't been diligent. And so this is an opportunity, especially, I hate to say it, since so many people are going to be out of work now, to take our country back, to really re-envision it. So they're talking about, building back, or America 2.0, all this kind of stuff. You know what? F that, like their system. Don't let them define for us what our country's going to look like. Yeah, I'd like a cleaner environment. I'd like to, rebuild the earth. But I want to do it holistically. Like, we need to talk to each other about it as citizens.
Not with GMOs.
Yeah, well, if we let them do this, create this new system, it's going to benefit them. It's not going to benefit us.
Exactly.
Right?
And what's interesting about that is so important, because what's happening really, we need to get a handle on our own ability to cooperate with each other. I think that is a really key realization in all this. And at the end of the day, we do have the ability to build our own version of things. And we've proven it with dark journalism. There's a whole corridor of journalism right here, and it's available. So there's so many opportunities to do that. And I think that's where it's going. But I absolutely agree. And with that, let's catch up with the super chats.
Okay, super chats. Let's shout you guys out. Okay, Occult Fan, Eurythmy is Fun, Gil and Joy R, Stephen, Jim Sarge 3 ID, Stacy Chiuli, Dorian Hewitt, Doyle Wayne, Cold Aussie, Bubble Dancing, SSC TDI, Shazam, Luke Walker, Unconscious Zone, Hatman, Lasta FF, Phil K. Dick Film Festival, John Thayer Sr., Alien Resistance Group, Claire Cranmer, and Deborah Forbes. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Wow. It's great to have your support. We really appreciate it. And to all our subscribers, I just want to say thank you. I want to say that behind and lurking our whole discussion and the things that we're discussing as far as the leadership, etc., our Earth changes, because the Earth changes, whether talked about by the mystery schools or by the Transcenders or whatever. They're lurking out there as a reality that might reset some things. And if anything, we've always thought about them as something, could humanity be spared from the Earth changes or a pole shift or something? Now, it almost seems like it would be a welcome shift, but hopefully we don't have to go through that. I do feel that the Earth changes question needs to be addressed. So that's something that we're going to do a show on. It's great to have everyone here. I'm going to do a few shout outs there. Frank Monday, it's great to see you. The great Amazinus. There we go. B. Nickel. Reptile Z up there. Wayne Peak. Fantastic. Britannia Young. Fantastic. Great to see you. Kevin Bauman. Wow, great questions in the ideas room tonight. Michael Silver. Food Bar Fighter, Occult Fan. Carl Young, great name. Golden Girl. Roosevelt, now you're out there, sir. Scarlet Fire. Wow, just great to see everyone with us tonight. We'll be back with you next Friday. And we have an exciting episode, episode 112 coming up for you. Michael Gale Media, great to see you. And
can you show the book one more time?
Yes, Challenges of Change. That is the book. Stan Fulham, as told, the Transcenders kind of tell the story in the book, but Stan gave us the hint, the clue about what was going to come, and he put his reputation on the line, because you could look like a real fool saying there were going to be UFOs hovering over New York City, and it doesn't happen, but it did, and Stan predicted it. How often do you get a UFO prediction that happens? That alone is remarkable and historic. Why don't the UFO researchers pay attention to Stan and this remarkable story? I don't understand it, but we are. That's for sure. And it made a big personal impression on me, because at the time I got the press release, I was working for some magazine. So, it was one of those signposts along the way.
And do you want to share the little secret about what the Transcenders told you to do when you were getting Dark Journalist up and running?
It was interesting. What they said was, first of all, I was going to ask them about things that I was doing, and they told me they already were into the conversation about what I was doing, and they made some very interesting predictions about things. But they said the whole thing is going to be video, you know, and I thought that was really interesting because that's how I had seen doing the show. It wasn't like a blog, or it wasn't other things. And yeah.
The suit.
Oh, yes. Interestingly enough,
Mm-hmm.
they saw me wearing the suit with their great psychic vision. No, they really, I have to say Thurston was one of a kind. And when we lost him, we lost somebody, you know, it was very vital. And we have to really, when people are here with these amazing abilities, really celebrate them. And, you know, we have incredible people right now on the alternative side. I've pointed them out, but, you know, definitely get behind Gigi Young and, you know, that kind of information in the types of things we can bring forward with it. Of course, our friend at Forbidden Knowledge, Alexandra, the great work that she does, just amazing. Catherine Fitz, Dr. Farrell, off the charts, incredible. And they've given me such incredible inspiration that I really appreciate it. We will see you next week, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us. And remember the October 13th, 2010 UFO sighting. Something was going on there. What was going on? I'll leave you with this, which is I have one of those strange news recordings of the flights being canceled for that day. Let's see if I can get this as a parting shot, everyone.
Some planes had to be briefly grounded. The reason? The radar facility on Long Island that handles all arrivals and departures had to be evacuated after an odor of gas was detected. Some controllers did find floating objects.
So that little odor of gas in the airport supposedly was the reason that they grounded all the planes during that sighting over New York. Put two and two together on that. It's pretty easy. Mm-hmm. And with that, Miss Olivia, you get the last word.
Well, the last word is the is the message that I read most in the ideas room tonight, which is let's go, Brandon.
Let's go, Brandon. It just feels good. And you know, it says end broadcast, but it never really ends. Thank you so much, everyone. And we will see you next week. Have a great Sunday. Talk soon.
God bless.